My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201 Meeting of Four. In addition, in the past 2 years, Darkblade has installed centurions in dozens of counties across the country, and it is time to promote some commanders. Therefore, Edward divided England into 8 parts as before: Northeast England, Northwest England, Yorkshire and the Humber, West Central England, East Central England, East England, Southwest England, and Southeast England. Each of these 8 regions has a commander-in-chief. Add Wales and Scotland and Ireland, so there are 11,000 commanders in total for His Majesty's arrangement. Guy didn't know whether he was happy or what. Anyway, he didn't lose much of his rights, but his position was promoted from commander to leader, which was a big step forward. Moreover, the flexibility of the points system has brought him a lot of benefits, like a lot of money. 1 point for an ordinary task, and 1 point can be exchanged for £2. He is the leader of the Darkblade, so his points are 1/10 of the accumulated points of all the centurions, and the centurions are 1/10 of the accumulated points of the captains under him, and the captain and vice-captain are the same. Ordinary people are no different. The points he has obtained are countless. Conservatively estimated, there are more than 200 points at present. However, it is still impossible for him to become a knight without the points of special missions issued by the king. If he converted all the points into pounds, then there would be more than £500. Enough for him to buy more than 100 acres of land in the countryside and become a landlord. Of course, he is not so stupid, he might as well exchange points for land. This is not only more convenient, but also cheaper. Guy walked out of the room, silently calculating how many fields he could redeem with points along the way, and couldn't help but feel happy in his heart. Edward sat down on the chair and wiped his sweat. This trip made him very tired. Emma, you tell the rest, I'm tired today, let them come back tomorrow. Edward's voice was weak and limp, as if he was about to fall asleep. In fact, he was planning to do so. Seeing His Majesty the King's appearance, Emma was very distressed. His Majesty the King has worked so hard for England. It seems that the teacher is right. It is a wise choice to be loyal to His Majesty the King. Emma nodded slightly, closed the door softly, and began to announce to the waiting people in this regard, these people have no choice but to sigh and come back tomorrow. After Guy came back from the palace, he didn't stay at home for long before rushing to the Bloodblade headquarters. In the past, in addition to the king's appropriation, the cost of the Darkblade was to control the gangs in the city, or the dock gangs, and received a large amount of contributions from them, as did France and England. Moreover, with the support of the king, the development of Darkblade is getting faster and faster. The king's annual appropriation cannot meet the cost of Darkblade at all, so the proportion of donations from gangsters is getting larger and larger every year. These gangsters bring Darkblade tens of thousands of pounds in income, which supports the expansion of Darkblade. All of this was done with the acquiescence of His Majesty the King, and one of the deputy commanders was in charge of finances. This was arranged by His Majesty the King, and he did not dare to be greedy. Followed by the 2 younger brothers, they came directly to the headquarters base, which was renamed Bloodblade as a translucent institution. The headquarters was set up in a building not far from Whitehall Palace, and there were 2 people guarding the door. My lord. The 2 guards hurriedly bowed to salute when they saw their boss approaching. In this regard, Guy didn't even bat an eyelid, and went straight in. He didn't say hello and a cordial greeting like Darkblade did at the beginning, and he no longer has the need to do so. Walked in hastily, and the members passing by along the way saluted one by one. Guy walked into his office. Regardless, Mr. Truss, let me know that the current centurion in Renton and all people above the centurion in England are coming to the meeting for a period of 1 week. Facing the middle-aged man who was bending over beside him, Guy ordered directly use a pigeon to pass it over, so it's faster. Yes, sir. Truss understood the importance of the matter, then bent down to salute, and agreed decisively. You, go and call some deputy commanders over to my office for a meeting, immediately. Looking at the other person beside him, Guy looked at him and said then, in less than 10 minutes, the other 3 deputy commanders rushed over with sweat on their foreheads. My lord, what's the matter? A young man in his 20s in clothes and leather shoes asked suspiciously. Guy looked over and saw that this was the deputy commander sent by the king. His name was David. He was in charge of finances. I heard that he was the son of a steward who was good at settling accounts. Yes. My lord, what is so important? This person is also the deputy commander sent by the king, who is responsible for monitoring the exchange of points and promoting the spiritual work of loyalty to the king in Darkblade. His name is Charles, and he is also a young man in his 20s. He is relatively strong, looks kind and amiable, and has many friends in Darkblade, and the remaining deputy commander in charge of promotion is named Ed, who is his old subordinate. Because of his strength in recruiting orphans, he suddenly became the first centurion. Afterwards, he seemed to be caught by the king in Portsmouth, on his recommendation, became the deputy commander. His gaze also turned to Guy, with a trace of exploration. Everyone, I went to meet His Majesty the King today, and His Majesty is dissatisfied with our Darkblade's performance during this period of time. Guy stood up, his eyes stayed on the faces of the three for a moment, and then he said in a deep tone when the other three heard that His Majesty was dissatisfied with them. Their faces were filled with nervousness, and they all stared at Guy, hoping that his next sentence would bring good news, and Guy didn't disappoint them, and continued, after my detailed explanation, His Majesty the King has eliminated some prejudices against us, but this sentence, however, stretched their heartstrings tightly again. His Majesty the King has made some corrections to our Darkblade. Everyone must actively cooperate. After speaking, Guy looked at the three of them. Of course, serving His Majesty, this is what we should do. Charles, who looked kindly, couldn't wait to express his attitude, and the others nodded in agreement. These three are the leaders of the three major factions other than Gay. After the four of them nodded, there was basically no resistance to reform. After that, Guy changed the name of Darkblade to Bloodblade, and told them all about the merger of the Department of Criminal Justice into the newly established Palace Intelligence Department, and the establishment of 11 commanders. The three of them would of course become the deputy chiefs, but for the position of the 11 commanders, including Guy, of course the four of them had to discuss it carefully. Chapter 202. The Princess Gets Married. In this regard, Edward nodded lightly, non-committal. He did not know how many times he had heard such words. This has almost become the mantra of the nobles. The same is true for Princess Mary. Her face was calm. She glanced sideways with her beautiful eyes, and then recovered. In this area of strict order, it is rare for ordinary nobles to see the king, let alone a nobleman like him. This is not bad. If it is a commoner, I am afraid that I can't even speak now, and I will lose face in front of him. It can be said that the gap between nobles and ordinary people is not only in wealth and connections, but in all aspects, even if there are not many in each aspect, but adding up. It will be big. And the young captain volunteered to lead the way in front, polite and respectful, which left a good impression on Edward when he was promoted in the future. If he saw his name on the list, his chances would be much higher. This is why so many people like to be close to the king soon, under the leadership of the young captain. Edward and Princess Mary came to a bedroom with only more than 10 square meters. Open the wooden door, facing a big bed covered with a goose-down quilt. There is a beautifully carved wardrobe beside the bed, and there is a dressing table beside the bed, and a glass mirror about 1 foot is placed on the table. The whole room is neat and simple. Without there are so many decorations, and there are no flowers, which does not match the identity of the princess. There was nothing Edward could do about it. It was arranged by Princess Mary yesterday. Princess Mary sent a maid to decorate this temporary bedroom, and Edward couldn't intervene, and this is also in line with Princess Mary's Catholic belief. Compared with other nobles, she is still simpler. After all, Princess Mary looked up and nodded with satisfaction. Sister, why don't you feel wronged and stay for a few days? It's the same on the boat. Edward looked at his eldest sister, who was about to go far away, and said goodbye without knowing what to meet. Having been together for more than 10 years, there is also some emotion, and Edward feels a little sad in his heart. Edward, these are enough. As a believer of the Lord, how can I ask for so much? Princess Mary said softly, looking at her younger brother who was about to grow up. As for Princess Mary's words, Edward felt a little happy, which meant that Princess Mary no longer suppressed her beliefs, and her heart began to relax. Since the Reformation of Henry VIII, the entire royal palace, and even most of the nobles, had completely changed their beliefs, leaving the Pope of Rome behind and believing in Anglicanism. However, Princess Mary, who had always been hated by Henry VIII, could only suppress her Catholic belief and did not show it openly, for fear of offending Henry VIII. In such a lonely environment, Princess Mary's belief in Catholicism became more and more determined, even reaching the point of fanaticism in history. After the death of Edward VI, as soon as she came to power, she hunted and killed Protestants, and was called Bloody Mary. After Edward succeeded as King of England, he took a relaxed attitude towards Princess Mary's beliefs, which made her a lot easier. However, The English ladies who have believed in Anglicanism for decades have been unable to chat with Princess Mary, and she has always been lonely in her heart now. After boarding the ship, she was about to arrive in Spain, and she suddenly expressed her faith in front of Edward, which proved that she was in a good mood. I am afraid that Princess Mary agreed to marry to Spain because Spain is a Catholic country. Besides, I heard that Prince Philip is also a fanatical Catholic, so the Protestants in Spain will be sad next time. Edward thought gloatingly in his heart. Edward, may the Lord bless you and make your health better and better. Princess Mary touched her younger brother, who had been with her for more than 10 years, with her hand. Her expression was a little sad, and then she restrained her emotions and blessed with a smile. You too, my sister, Edward said with a smile, seeing Princess Mary praying for him. Princess Elizabeth then knocked on the door to signal Edward that his time was up. Edward pouted helplessly, turned and left. Goodbye, my sister. After saying goodbye, Edward walked out of the room. Princess Elizabeth then walked in, closed the door, and talked quietly with Princess Mary. Edward didn't want to listen to what the daughters said, so he sighed and walked out of the cabin slowly, onto the deck. The sea breeze blowing in front of him made him feel relieved, and the sadness when parting was also a little lighter. As a king, you don't need to have too many of these feelings, as long as you have his people and country in mind. Of course, to put it bluntly, it is a right at this time. The nobles on the pier turned their eyes to the cargo ships around the warship. Even Edward, who was blowing the sea breeze, could hear the voices of envy from the nobles. They were all words such as, the king is really rich, the royal family is so generous, and the Spaniards are blessed in this regard. Edward will also smile heartily. This is the result he wants. The other 3 cargo ships were nothing but the dowry prepared by Edward for Princess Mary. As a Princess of England, the dowry must be large, so as to reflect the great power of the United Kingdom and increase the prestige of Princess Mary. A rich and powerful country is the mother's family, so think about the consequences before bullying Princess Mary. It's no wonder that the nobles were making a fuss. The dowry of these 3 ships was worth at least £50,000 inside. There is a boatload of sea salt. Yes, it is sea salt, about £50,000. This is just the output of the royal estate for a day. There is no cost, but the value has reached about £20,000, which is very affordable. Besides, Edward is also trying to open up the market in Spain and Portugal. If it goes well, he also wants to sell to the Mediterranean region. There are many markets in this area. Another boat was paper, pure white paper. After being sold in England, it became very popular, and each sheet has reached as much as 1 shilling. In the eyes of those priests, only such holy and flawless white paper is the best material to carry the words of God. If it is possible to open up the situation in Spain, where Catholicism is prevalent, then the Italian region and the Ottoman Empire will be huge markets. The other was laden with woolens and English textiles, which, though it looked like a great deal, were worth less than £10,000. Therefore, the marriage of Princess Mary not only brought England an ally, but also brought England a huge market. In order to develop England's business, Edward also allowed those nobles and merchants to pay some protection fees, and merchant ships could travel with Her Royal Highness. Sure enough, this is a political marriage. What about Princess Mary? In this regard, Edward can only shrug his shoulders and say that I am just killing 2 birds with 1 stone. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 Candidates. As Princess Elizabeth disembarked with red and swollen eyes, accompanied by several maids and guards, Princess Mary officially entered the warship. The warship started sailing and gradually left Edward's sight until there was no trace of it. The cold wind blows away the long hair at the back of Edward's head. The long taupe hair looks very elegant, adding a touch of chic. Let's go, Elizabeth, it's time for us to go back. Edward sighed as he squinted his eyes slightly as he watched the departing ship under the sunlight. Elizabeth softly agreed, but her slender jade neck didn't move at all. Her eyes were fixed on the river rippled by the wind. Obsessed. Seeing this, Edward didn't urge her to go back. It's not bad to stay here for a while. If Princess Mary's mother died of melancholy after divorce, then Princess Elizabeth's mother was beheaded by Henry VIII and died miserably since childhood. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Mary have loved each other and depended on each other for life. It can be said that in Princess Elizabeth's mind, Princess Mary is equivalent to the role of mother. So farewell. I don't know when and what month we will meet again. Elizabeth, who is wearing a white dress today, has not undergone much modification, only lace has been added to the skirt, and the whole person presents a kind of elegance and holiness, which is in line with her title of Virgin Queen in the future. Standing there shriveled like this, Edward felt a little uncomfortable, so he simply found a topic to enliven the atmosphere. "You have this day too, Elizabeth," Edward said with emotion as he stared at the river surface under the sun, reflecting light from time to time, irritating his eyes. "Yes, I also have this day," Princess Elizabeth also murmured, and then she realized that her calm face was cloudy and rainy. She turned her head and said excitedly, "I won't get married." Seeing the huge contrast, Edward himself was shocked, speechless for a while. "Elizabeth, every woman must marry, even if you are a princess." Looking at the excited Her Royal Highness, Edward's expression became a little unsteady. Looking into Princess Elizabeth's dark blue eyes, he said word by word, "Unless you want to be a nun." Edward smiled exaggeratedly. "I won't let the nuns go." Thinking of the nuns chanting and singing in the monastery all day long, Elizabeth's scalp went numb. "I won't marry either." Elizabeth continued without hesitation, looking at her younger brother who had become the king. "You are already 18 years old. There is no princess who won't get married. You will be a laughingstock." Edward felt a little headache about this, but he didn't give up. He still tried to persuade her, with a hint of pleading on his face. Elizabeth was unmoved by this, and looked at Edward with stubborn eyes, and said decisively, "Stop talking, I won't get married anyway." Hearing this sentence, Edward felt his head hurt even more. He did not marry Princess Elizabeth to change history, but for her sake. After more than 10 years of getting along, an iron rod has been ground into dozens of needles. Not to mention siblings who are related by blood. Elizabeth was so determined that she even looked into Edward's eyes, telling him exactly how stubborn and confrontational she was. "Okay. It's up to you." Edward retreated helplessly and waved his hands. "In a few years, you will tell me that you want to get married." Elizabeth watched her young brother make concessions, and then her eyes gradually softened, and her tone became friendly. "Don't worry about that, your sister has her own decision." After finishing speaking, he showed a smile without showing his teeth, and turned around and walked away generously. Seeing this, Edward could only shrug his shoulders, glanced at the sky where the dark clouds were gradually rising, and sighed. "It depends on God's will." Edward understood that Elizabeth saw her mother beheaded when she was a child, and she was too scared. Now she still resists getting married, and the burden is heavy. Afterwards, Edward followed. His handsome face was modest and polite, and the surrounding nobles finally saw His Majesty's face like this. The low-ranking nobles who didn't see each other several times a year faced such a gentle and humble His Majesty the King, and they had a much better impression of His Majesty the King. Taking time out to meet several prestigious nobles, Edward got into the carriage under the escort of the guards. The nobles couldn't help but feel regretful about this. It was rare to see His Majesty the King for such a short time. Soon after returning to the palace, Edward and Elizabeth separated and went about their own business. The next day, August 11th, 1549, the weather in London was cloudy. The air quality was not bad, with a slight cool breeze, and the temperature was around 20 degrees, which was a pleasant weather. So, early in the morning, Elizabeth took the Queen Mother Mary and little Lolita to ride horses at a horse farm outside London, leaving Edward alone, who called him a king. Jack got up from the room early in the morning, put on the guard's clothes, tidied up his appearance, and walked out of the room confidently after feeling quite satisfied at this time. Other people in the room also got up one after another, combing their clothes on their own. "Jack, why did you wake up so early today?" a sleepy-eyed guard in shorts asked with doubts in his eyes. "Your Majesty, the King summoned me today. Can you not come earlier?" Jack said coquettishly with a proud face. "Tisk. Jack, you'll be prosperous in the future." Another guard sighed enviously. "Just don't forget us," one of the remaining guards added before Jack left. In this regard, Jack just smiled, and he didn't make a big deal. He knew that whether he can develop today depends on luck, but the roommates who have lived together for 2 years will naturally not forget them if they have benefits after being adopted by the king. He came to the palace to become a bodyguard. This was an honorable and respectable job. The monthly salary was as much as £2, which allowed him to save a lot of money without worrying about board and lodging. It's okay, he's not satisfied yet. He wants to stand out, climb to a higher position, never go hungry again. He's had enough of these miserable days, and if you want to realize this wish, you have to climb up and become a master. For him, the only way out at present is to be favored by the king, so as to seize the opportunity. Since yesterday, when Emma, who was born as an orphan, sent someone to inform the king that he wanted to see him, he knew that the waiting opportunity was in front of him, and he must work hard to get it. No matter how high the price was silently making up his mind and his heart. Jack had a faint smile on his face, and when he met the acquainted guards on the road, he nodded slightly in response. Chapter 204 Annual Income of the Royal Family. Afterwards, Edward had a constructive conversation with Jack. First of all, it is determined that the main work of the palace intelligence services within the country, including Scotland, Wales and Ireland, which are all within his scope. Then, the question of personnel is drawn in the Star Chamber Court and Bloodblade, and all of them must be of civilian background and of high quality. The main task is to maintain social stability and maintain royal power. Different from Bloodblade's usual passive search for information, the Palace Intelligence Office needs to actively install informants, especially the informants among officials and nobles, so it needs to spend a lot of money to buy or arrange in this regard. Edward was ruthless and directly took £30,000 from the inner court as the initial fee in order to reduce the pressure. He also directly handed over some of the Dark Blade's hidden stations in various places to speed up the construction of the Palace Intelligence Department. Of course, unlike the Bloodblade, the Palace Intelligence Office also needs law enforcement powers, and they frequently enforce the law. Therefore, the Palace Intelligence Office is directly under the banner of the Star Chamber Court. For convenience, the composition of the Palace Intelligence Department is very simple. One is the Executive Department, the other is the Personnel Department, the other is the Criminal Department, and the General Affairs Department. The Executive Department is basically the superficial force of the Palace Intelligence Department. They are composed of capable and strong personnel. They are action factions who are responsible for arresting target personnel. Boldness and caution are their direction. The Personnel Department is the Secret Investigation Department, which is in charge of all spies and informants, as well as the development of informants. The Criminal Division is specialized in dealing with traitors from the Bloodblade and the Palace Intelligence Department, as well as some middle and low-level officials and civilians. As for nobles, no matter how big or small, they must be handed over to the Star Chamber Court, and only they have the right to deal with them. The General Affairs section should be the simplest, but also the most complicated. They are responsible for arranging and handling the cooperation of various departments, and are also responsible for the payment of wages and training of new members of the Palace Intelligence Division. The above is the general outline, and the rest can be referred to the Bloodblade. Since he had prepared in advance, Edward handed over the plan directly to him, and then encouraged him. After Jack walked out of the office full of joy, Edward began to deal with the royal affairs again. This time, because it was the royal family's internal affairs, Edward was not on the office, but in his own study, which was comfortable and could express intimacy. After Edward sat down, Sir John, Knight Alexander, and Maid Luna walked in together. After seeing Edward, the three showed respectful and serious expressions. Sir John is the Minister of Royal Affairs and belongs to the Ministers. He specializes in managing the territories and manors of the royal family in various places, such as dukedoms or earldoms. In the absence of Edward, he can also handle some important affairs of the royal family's territory. It can be said that he is the bridge between Edward and the various territories. With him, it is much more convenient to manage the various territories. Lucy is the financial director of the royal family, which is the position Edward gave her. For example, after the tithes from various places are collected from the court, they must be handed over to her to record and check for any mistakes, and the customs duty, and the money for the tavern and the sale of liquor, all must be handed over to her. She owns the money. The Alexander Knight managed the guards and the garrison militia in the royal territory. It can be said that he holds military power. The reason why Viscount Smith was not allowed to come was because he was no longer suitable for managing the royal army. He could be said to be a local nobleman preventing nobles. This is what Tudor kings will do. The royal army cannot be in the hands of nobles, and it is even more impossible for a noble with high prestige in the army. Therefore, Viscount Smith also consciously went back to manage his own manor, leaving his eldest son to serve beside the king. After the three saluted Edward, they automatically began to report to work. First came Sir John, of highest rank and oldest. Your Majesty, thanks to your blessings, the royal family's territory has not experienced much wind and rain this year, but the year is much better than usual. Sir John is now like a meatball, round and round, much plumper than before. When you smile, you will squint your eyes, and you can't find it unless you look carefully. Due to the promotion of the iron plow and the popularization of that fertilizer, the grain production of the entire royal domain and the manor has doubled. It can be said that this year's income may exceed £150,000. Moreover, nearly 100,000 acres of wasteland have been developed this year. It can be estimated that when the wasteland becomes mature, the income can directly reach £200,000. This is a figure that has not been reached in previous years, Having said this, Sir John couldn't help but marvel. These are all thanks to His Majesty the King. It is because of you that the royal family can increase so much income. You really deserve to be the agent of God on the world, the greatest king in the world. I can't help but be deeply fascinated by your greatness. Inescapable, oh God. This is your greatest gift to England. Okay, sir, you can stop. Properly listening to some praises can make you feel happy, but endless praises are uncomfortable to hear, and most of them are heard, which makes Edward. I know enough is enough. Sir John was used to this situation being often interrupted by Edward, and he bowed respectfully back to his original position with a very calm face. To be honest, the reason why the royal family's land has so much income is thanks to Edward's merger of the Scottish royal family's land. Otherwise the increase would not be so exaggerated, and it would have increased by £50,000 all at once. Next, Knight Alexander stepped out of the ranks, bowing slightly. Your Majesty, the 5,000 royal guards are unscathed, and after a long period of off-the-job training, they are already a powerful army. As for the militias in the territories, let alone, Cavalier Alexander spoke in a leisurely manner, with a magnetic voice, and it sounded like a kind of enjoyment. Very good, Mr. Knight, I am very satisfied. Edward nodded to this. 5,000 standing troops are enough to suppress England. However, I hope you can expand the proportion of matchlock guns in the army, and strive to expand to the entire army, Edward said with a serious face. This gave him a lot of pressure. Yes, Your Majesty, as you wish. Knight Alexander replied firmly after thinking for a moment. Compared with the European continent, the British still mainly use cold weapons, especially the superstitious longbow, which is far behind. Finally, there is Luna. I saw that she was not wearing any makeup. Her fair and tender face was full of shrewdness. Your Majesty, in the first half of this year, the total income of taverns and flaming wine has reached £200,000. In addition, you have abolished the privileges of Hansa merchants and increased their tariffs. The tariffs in the first half of the year have reached £50,000. The second half is expected to is also like this. As for the religious property auction and tithes at the court, there will be about £100,000 this year. In other words, the royal family's income this year will reach £750,000. This is a figure that all the kings of England have not reached over the years, but this is not the end, Edward thought fiercely in his heart. Chapter 205 Bank. £750,000. This is the annual income of the Tudor royal family, but at this time, the annual income of the wealthy Henry II has reached 1 million, which is still far behind. There is a lot of money, but more is spent. The combined annual expenditure of the two spy organizations, Bloodblade and Palace Intelligence, is £50,000 to £60,000. In addition, the monthly salaries of the guards and the navy are £20,000, and the construction of courts, dukedoms and earldoms. If the palace expenses are added, it will cost at least £400,000 a year, which is nothing. The year of the war, in fact, it was the court that spent the most. During the time of Henry VIII, hundreds of thousands of pounds were spent on clothing every year. On the contrary, in other aspects, the royal family's expenses are pitiful. Of course, this is not only true of the nobles and royal families of England, France, Spain, Austria, and other countries. The advent of the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery liberated human nature and got rid of the oppression of religion on human nature. But when it comes to the nobles, the performance is even more intense. Once the nobles who have been repressed by religion for a long time are released, the consequences will be dire. In the Middle Ages, religion required people to dress simply, be faithful and made in the past. The nobles kept mistresses secretly and were afraid of seeing the light, but now, the nobles raised mistresses openly, and even showed off by comparing who had more mistresses. But the clothing is even more extreme. Before each nobleman attends the banquet, he must prepare a unique and gorgeous dress. If he wears old clothes, he will be laughed at, and it usually costs at least hundreds of thousands of pounds to prepare such a dress, and if your dress is outstanding, you will get the favor of the ladies and become the darling of the banquet. Male aristocrats tend to be more crazy about beauty than women. For example, Henry VIII, a proud and self-satisfied king, owned hundreds of thousands of clothes, and even when he didn't have enough money, he asked Parliament to approve taxation to buy clothes. Therefore, the way to identify a nobleman is very simple. Just look at the frequency of his changing clothes and the luxurious clothes. The Emperor's New Clothes and Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales satirized the nobility with the remaining £300,000. Edward decided to use it to develop industry and establish an industry belonging to the royal family. In this regard, Edward is going to spend £50,000 to develop the woolen and cotton textile industry. This is England's strength, with small risks and high profits, making it the most suitable investment. Moreover, with the vigorous development of the Spanish market, demand exceeds demand, so there is no need to worry about sales. Moreover, it can also supply the annual refitting of the Guards and Navy. At this time, the clothes of the Guards and Navy were only distributed when they joined, basically for a lifetime, and there was no such thing as changing clothes at all. Therefore, cotton mills are used to make soldiers' clothing, and woolen mills are used to serve officers. They can be used for the army and exported to generate profits. This is a good investment direction. According to the plan, he will spend £20,000 to build a steel factory in the following centuries. Steel is the most representative of national strength. Steel can not only forge weapons, but also produce agricultural tools in wealthy lands, improving England's agricultural productivity. This steel factory must be established. With a steel factory, there must be an arsenal. In this regard, Edward will allocate another £50,000 to establish an arsenal, produce flintlock guns and cannons, and gunpowder, and establish a modern military industry. The Navy spends the bulk of it. If you want to defeat Spain and dominate Europe, the current English Navy must be expanded tenfold in order to have hope. Therefore, Edward has to invest £100,000 a year in naval shipbuilding and crew training. These are the minimum. In addition, it is necessary to develop its own fleet, develop handicrafts, and of course, have its own bank. Speaking of the bank, Mr. Adler Todd, the manager of the Royal Bank at this time, was sitting on a chair with a smile on his face, looking at the middle-aged man in front of him quietly and peacefully. Although he didn't say a word, this silent power couldn't help but shock the heartstrings even more. The raised lips naturally carried sarcasm, making the face of the middle-aged man sitting opposite him paler. Mr. Dwight, you know the purpose of my coming here today. Do you need me to tell you straight? With a provocative tone, Adler placed his hands casually, with a hint of contempt in his eyes. I understand, Mr. Todd. The middle-aged man wiped his sweat, and looked at Adler opposite him pleadingly. Give me a week, and in just 1 week, I will turn around and owe you £20,000 a penny. I will give you back a lot. The middle-aged man looked tired, and his long brown hair, which was combed meticulously, was messed up at this moment. He looked at Adler with pitiful eyes and a pleading expression on his face. It's not that I didn't give you a chance, Mr. Dwight. Adler showed a sincere expression. It's just that you didn't seize the opportunity. God can't save you anymore. It's been a month since you repaid the loan. Adler said disappointedly, but you still haven't repaid the loan. You can't blame me for being too vicious. According to the treaty, this place will be mine from now on, and you will have to live in the stinky gutters in the slums. Adler said with a smile on his face. Adler, don't think that I don't know that you sent people to instigate the robbery of my bank, and you even bribed people from the police department. Seeing that all his wealth was about to be lost, Dwight stood up abruptly, with a livid face, pointed at Adler's nose, and said excitedly, I just used the tricks you used to deal with others to deal with you, and I just learned from you. Adler shook his head, dismissing his accusations, and smiled lightly. Besides, do you think I don't know that you are going to run away? Is it the ship in 3 days' time? Seeing the paler Dwight, dripping with sweat, Adler couldn't help sneering. You are going to sell the bank to a Hanseatic businessman named Bill today. After you send me away, I'm afraid I will lose everything. Having said this, Adler's face became more and more ugly, and he suppressed Dwight sentence by sentence, with a forceful momentum. This is Lawyer Douglas. Do you need me to drive you away? As he spoke, a man with meticulously combed hair and eagle eyes came out and bowed to Dwight in response. Dwight limp on the ground. He knew that this time he might really be homeless. You send someone to tidy up the office. I don't want to stay in this rotten gambler's room. I'm afraid there are bad luck and curses. As he said that, Adler walked out of the bank headquarters with 4 branches, commanding the bank staff beside him majestically. Chapter 206, which, after Adler's hard work for a year, coupled with the King's endorsement, the Royal Bank of England expanded at an extremely fast speed. In less than a year, the Royal Bank expanded from 4 branches to 20 branches at once. Among them, there are 10 in London, 1 each in Birmingham, Edinburgh, Liverpool and other places. It can be said that Adler Bank, which originally had total assets of less than £10,000, has expanded to assets worth £50,000. It can be said that in England, the Royal Bank is no longer a small fish in the middle, but has become the top 3 banks in this regard. Adler is very confident that he will expand to the whole of Great Britain within 3 years and complete the mission entrusted to him by the King in this regard. Edward is also confident. In order to develop the Royal Bank, Edward stipulated that all officials of the city government and the central government, as well as the salaries of the guards, should be collected from the royal bank even. This year, Edward has already invested £20,000 as development funds, which is why the royal bank has developed rapidly. At the end of this year, Edward decided to allow the royal bank to open throughout England, and each of the 39 counties must have a branch. That is to say, by the end of the year, 29 more branches need to be established. Adler didn't understand this very much. If things go smoothly, the goal will definitely be achieved in 3 years. Why is it so urgent? There was a lot of discussion. In my heart helpless, Adler had no choice but to withstand the pressure and began to complete the task temporarily set by His Majesty the King. However, Adler was relieved by the £50,000 of preparation funds allocated by His Majesty the King, which greatly reduced the difficulty. For the second time, Adler had no choice but to start poaching people. Otherwise, there is no one in the bank space, but so many branches required a huge number of employees, so Adler had to send people to the Netherlands and began to invite some unemployed employees to come. Moreover, the situation of each county is different, some can be acquired, and some need to be rebuilt. Adler feels that he has suffered some in the past few months. Our Majesty the King can't control so much. The establishment of branches throughout England is an indispensable part of his future reforms. The Kingsley area of Kent, near London, was panicked at this time, and panic and fear spread among the crowd on the road. The usually busy crowd did not go to work, but gathered together, casting doubts, hatred, fear, etc. at a neatly decorated house. However, no one dared to knock on the door, or even speak loudly. Only men and women gathered outside the house, whispering to each other, fearing that people in the house would find out. But how is this possible? So many people coming together, the goal is too big. Inside the house, Mary Smith, in her 50s, was preparing dinner for her husband and son. Compared with other people in the village, the life of Mary's family is rich. It can be said that her family is called the richest man in the village compared with other villagers. Mary's family is a typical England yeoman, and her family not only owns 10 acres of land, but also leases 50 acres of land from the noble lord's family. Excluding expenses, the annual income is nearly £20. The son also married the daughter of another gentleman family and raised 3 children. The daughter also married a wealthy family. It can be said that her life was perfect, but last week, she was accused of being a chicken thief by her neighbor Elizabeth, which pissed her off. Would she steal a neighbor's chicken if she was identified Mrs. Smith? Moreover, her family is not without it. How could she steal a chicken? It was a slander of her reputation, a strong slander simply. The two had a big fight, and finally, Mary cursed Elizabeth to die of smallpox. Of course, Elizabeth scolded her as well, who knew that when Elizabeth and her husband quarreled last night, she was so angry that she was still lying on the bed, which made Mrs. Mary happy. For a long time thinking of this, Mrs. Mary felt that she was chopping vegetables much faster at this time. She glanced out the window and saw the neighbors gathering at the door of her house one by one, pointing and pointing, which made her puzzled. Putting down the kitchen knife, Mrs. Mary walked out of the kitchen, opened the door, and stared at the crowd in front of the house with some cloudy eyes. "What are you doing? What are you doing there?" Mrs. Mary said a little aggressively with her hips on her arms. In this regard, the crowd retreated slowly, and slowly dissipated without a trace of people. "There's nothing to do if you're full," Mrs. Mary muttered as she watched the disappearing crowd, and closed the door again. At this time, at her neighbor, Mrs. Elizabeth's house, Mrs. Elizabeth was lying on the bed with a face full of pain, howling a few words from time to time to show her sense of existence, and her son Jay sat by her bed, looked at his uncomfortable mother with a worried face, stood up again in a hurry, and looked forward to his father's return soon. His father was a deacon in the Baron's manor, and he assisted the housekeeper in managing the manor, so the family was quite rich, and he could bring back a little meat from the manor to improve food from time to time, much better than those villagers. My mother was sick, and thought it was a minor illness and didn't pay much attention to it. Who knew that she had been lying in bed for a week, and the doctor couldn't find anything wrong, which scared them a lot. Simply, his father went to consult an old man in his 70s in the manor, and only then did he know that his mother was cursed by a witch. This made them anxious. His father kept doing nothing, and with a large sum of money, he decided to invite the priest in the church to heal his mother from the witch's curse. In this way, Jay waited restlessly all morning, and finally saw his father. I saw a simple decorated carriage slowly parked in front of his house, and his father came out slowly from behind the carriage riding a donkey on the carriage. A priest with a gray beard and a gray robe got out of the carriage with the support of his servants, and walked towards his house under the leadership of his father. Father. Jay happily opened the door to welcome his father. "Lord Gilbert, please follow me." His father winked at him, and then respectfully invited him into his mother's room. In this regard, Jay stepped aside, followed behind his father, and followed in. Father Gilbert with a gray beard glanced at Mrs. Elizabeth lying on the bed, hurried over, looked at her face, rolled her eyelids again, and said solemnly to the host behind him, "Mr. Bangkok, your wife is indeed cursed by the witch." In this regard, the male host Bangkok turned even paler, and hurriedly asked, "My lord priest, please save Elizabeth." Chapter 207 Witch. Seeing the begging of the male host, Bangkok, Father Gilgit couldn't help but feel happy. "This is a big business, and I have to think about it carefully." Father Gilgit closed his eyes slightly, holding the silver cross around his neck with his right hand. His face was kind and gentle, giving people a sense of trust. For this, the male host Bangkok felt the deepest. He now felt that the priest was the best hope to save his wife. Jay also looked at the priest pleadingly, begging him to save his mother. "Don't worry, Mr. Bangkok. I just checked. Your wife has been cursed by a witch. This curse is very tricky." Father Gilgit looked at the father and son in front of him, and sighed softly, looking embarrassed regarding this. Jay turned his eyes to his father. Even if he was an idiot, he could understand what it meant, and Bangkok himself understood that when he first went there, he had already given the priest £10. Judging by his posture, he might have to ask for another £10. This is a lot of money, but for the sake of his wife, Bangkok reluctantly took out £10 from his pocket, held them up in front of Father Gilgit with trembling hands, and said with a forced smile, "My lord priest, in order to thank our Lord for his grace, this is a donation from our family." Seeing this, Father Gilgit nodded in satisfaction, and said with a kind smile, "Mr. Bangkok, we all see your pious belief in our Lord. I think the Almighty Lord will know it, and he will definitely know it. May your wife be safe." "Thank you, my lord, Holy Mary." Hearing the priest's words, Bangkok and his son showed joy on their faces, and prayed with their hands on their chests. The priest behind Father Gilgit had already put away the money bag that Bangkok held high, and prayed silently beside him. Afterwards, Father Gilgit walked slowly to Mrs. Elizabeth's bedside and read a passage from the Bible to her, hoping to use the words of the Lord to expel this vicious curse. After about 10 minutes, Mrs. Elizabeth still hadn't recovered. She was still in pain. The Bangkok father and son on the side were very anxious. Nervousness and prayer appeared on their faces at the same time. Father Gilgit, on the other hand, kept his usual expression. Reading the Bible aloud, everyone in the village knew that Mr. Bangkok had invited Father Gilgit to exorcise Mrs. Elizabeth from the curse. They flocked to Mr. Bangkok's house as if they were watching a play, and quietly observed it, or it can be said that it is bathing in the glory of the Lord. The Bangkok father and son didn't care much about this, but Father Gilgit was under a lot of pressure. If something went wrong this time, he would lose face a lot. People will not doubt the existence of the Lord, but only suspect that his belief in the Lord is not sincere. Seeing that reciting the Bible was ineffective, Father Gilgit took out his trump card: holy water. Generally speaking, Catholicism, and all Christianity, holy water refers to a kind of water that is placed in the church, prayed by the priest, and blessed by God to exorcise the devil and purify the soul. Therefore, when the priest asked the young priests around him to take a special container from the carriage, the bowl specially installed in the church was made of gold. So, all the villagers in the room looked devoutly at the holy water in Father Gilgit's hand, and whispered at the corners of their mouths, "With the holy water blessed by the Lord, the stubborn curse on Mrs. Elizabeth will definitely be exorcised." Facing Bangkok and his son, Father Gilgit said confidently as he spoke. Father Gilgit gently dipped his fingers in the holy water in the bowl, and then sprinkled the water on Mrs. Elizabeth, who had a face of pain. "Let's go now." Father Gilgit was still not at ease, and sprinkled it a few more times. Then he looked at Mrs. Elizabeth, who was still intact. Although he was a little embarrassed, he smiled on his face and nodded with satisfaction. The Bangkok father and son, who saw all this in their eyes, immediately looked at the priest with joy. "My lord priest, how is my wife?" Looking at the expectant Mr. Bangkok, the priest said gently, "Although the witch's curse is very strong, I have exorcised it. In a few days, Mrs. Elizabeth will recover." Immediately, all the villagers in the room cheered, and the words of praising God kept ringing out, and Father Gilgit's words also gained great popularity. Strange to say, after 2 days, Mrs. Elizabeth could suddenly get out of bed and walk, which amazed the whole village. People often came to Mrs. Elizabeth's house with their eyes wide open, and looked at Mrs. Elizabeth with a click of their tongues, and their belief in the Lord became more and more firm in their hearts. But it was Father Gilgit who gained the most. Since this incident, nobles and gentlemen from the Kingsleyan area have come to the church in an endless stream, asking the priest to bless or rescue their families. However, after a few days, Mrs. Elizabeth fell ill again and lay in bed. Even Father Gilgit could not save her soon. Lady Elizabeth went to meet God on this regard. A villager suddenly said that he had seen Mrs. Elizabeth and Mrs. Mary quarreling, and Mrs. Mary also cursed Mrs. Elizabeth to die of smallpox, and after that Mrs. Elizabeth fell ill as a result. Such a picture naturally emerged in the hearts of the people. Mrs. Mary was not willing to be humiliated after a quarrel with Mrs. Elizabeth. As a witch, Mrs. Mary secretly cursed Mrs. Elizabeth, which made Mrs. Elizabeth fall ill, and Father Gilgit exorcised her. In addition to the curse, but Mrs. Mary cursed again, and Mrs. Elizabeth went to see God directly as a result. Everyone in the whole village was in danger, fearing that they would end up with Mrs. Elizabeth, so they came to Mrs. Elizabeth's house together under the leadership of Father Gilgit in Bangkok and his son at this time. The 7 members of their family were having lunch happily. Although Mrs. Mary looked mean in front of outsiders, she was kind and pleasant in front of her family. She was a kind old lady, but at this time, the family who were having dinner heard the commotion, and the noise became louder and louder. Suddenly, the door of his house was kicked open. I saw the silhouettes of Father Gilgit in Bangkok standing in front of them, followed by men and women villagers. Everyone was furious and shouted slogans, "Hand over the witch! Hand over the witch!" In this regard, Mrs. Mary and her family were in a state of confusion, not understanding why. Father Gilgit stood up with a firm face, and said in a stern and fierce tone, "Mr. Smith, quickly hand over your wife, she is a witch." Chapter 208. Miko. Mr. Smith, his son, and his daughter-in-law were all taken aback. Only a few children aged 7 or 8 still looked ignorant, not knowing what it meant. "My lord priest, are you mistaken? Mary can't be a witch." Mr. Smith looked at the priest in front of him suspiciously and asked, "That's right, Mr. Smith, your wife is indeed a witch. She cursed Mrs. Elizabeth to death. Come here and stay away from that witch." Father Gilgit said seriously, looking at the frantic Mary with vigilant eyes. "Madam, I am more sure of the fact that she is a witch, Mr. Smith. The priest is right. Yes. Stay away from that witch. Miss Elizabeth was killed by her, I can testify." Afterwards, all kinds of villagers on the side spoke one by one, knocking Smith's confidence to pieces, and his face gradually turned pale. But his son and daughter-in-law had already taken their 3 grandchildren to the crowd, praying continuously, and he looked back at his wrinkled and pleading wife, feeling a little unbearable. "William, don't believe what they say, I'm not a witch." Madam Mary said hoarsely, tears streaming down her face. Unconsciously, however, the belief in his heart forced him to make a choice. "Mary, I'm sorry." After saying this to his wife, William Smith walked over dejectedly. After seeing that there were no hostages, Father Gilgit nodded. Immediately, the strong and brave villagers, after the priest sprinkled the holy water, shouted "Holy Mary," and walked over slowly, preparing to capture Mary. Lady, in this regard, Mrs. Mary did not resist. In fact, she could not resist, and could only let the villagers catch her. Soon, in the village, under the trial of Father Gilgit and the village chief, Mrs. Mary was declared a witch, and people were sent to the county court to make a complaint, requesting the court to sentence Mrs. Elizabeth to death for murder. Since these villagers are not farmers attached to the manor, but free people, the nearby manor court cannot hear this case. They took the case to the High Court in Kent. In this regard, the judges reported the matter to the magistrate committee in the county, and the squires and county lieutenants, that is, the magistrate in the previous article, whose name was changed due to some overlap with the magistrate, discussed together, and finally decided to hand over the case to His Majesty the King for adjudication. According to Edward's judicial reform, the local courts and the central royal court are managed vertically, and the local security committees are retained, but the personnel are arranged by the central royal court. However, some traditions in the local counties are still difficult to change, and the county lieutenant's interference in the judiciary is still inevitable, can only come slowly. Moreover, Edward announced to all local courts that as long as there are death penalty cases, they will all be approved by the central government, that is, they will be submitted to the king for review. Therefore, this witch case was not directly reviewed and approved by the county as before, but was transferred to the royal court. Since Kent is relatively close to London, the witch case came to the royal court in less than a day, presented to the exclusive office of the Court of Justice. The Court of Justice is composed of 9 justices. It is the highest institution that manages the royal court. After all the cases are collected, they will be gathered in the justice's office, and then handed over to the justice for review, and finally sent to the subordinate department of the royal court. Major cases, such as the death penalty, are handled exclusively by justices. Your Excellency, this is the witch case from Kent. A well-dressed secretary walked up to a judge with a big nose and said softly, "N." The big-nosed judge snorted softly, and then flipped through the pages. Another witch case. "You go to inform the Ministry of Civil Affairs." "No. Inform the court and the Ministry of Religion to send someone to Kent County to deal with it." As he said that, the big-nosed judge patted his head, shook his head with a wry smile, and said to the young secretary, "I'm so confused. It turns out that such lawsuits have always been a matter for the Civil Litigation Department. Some time ago, the king personally transferred these cases to the Ministry of Religion for handling." "Yes, Your Excellency, I'm going now." The young secretary didn't answer, and left directly. He knew that His Excellency had a mountain of things to deal with every day, and he didn't have time to chat with him. This was just talking to himself. Soon, he transferred the case to the Ministry of Religion downstairs. In recent years, incidents of witches have emerged all over England. In Kent alone, there were 2 incidents of witches this year, and there are at least hundreds of incidents in England every year. Although the Anglican sect is more rational, the folk persecution of witches has become a kind of culture. The cities are better, but the rural areas have changed little. According to historical records, from 1560 to 1680, there were 132 cases of witches in Kent alone. Witches are currently divided into white witches and witches in rural areas. The white witch is generally considered to be kind. She can help people find things, heal people, predict the future, and cast down demons, and it is believed that the black witch brought people shipwrecks, storms, plagues, bad harvests, etc., and even troubles, bad luck, accidental disasters, and illnesses are all attributed to her. It can be said that as long as you encounter anything that goes wrong, you can. It is said that the black witch is at work. Cursing is a common method used by black witches, which is why people think that Mrs. Mary is a black witch. As for how to deal with black witches, people generally think that they can only be tied to a cross and burned, and they cannot be hanged. People think that black witches generally have magic that can resurrect themselves, and the fire is the most thorough. The people who are generally accused of being witches are women, especially married and widowed women. The general characteristics of these people are that they are stingy, mean, often quarrel with neighbors, and unwilling to help others, so they are often accused of being witches. Edward felt that this kind of case could only be solved by religious people. It would be more convenient and quicker for a more senior monk to tell those ignorant people that this person is not a witch, and it would be irrefutable. Therefore, the Ministry of Civil Affairs was transformed into the Ministry of Religion. Of course, this approach is immediate. From the beginning of 1549 to August, the royal court received a total of 96 witch cases, and 63 cases were resolved peacefully. The remaining 3 cases were mainly due to the distance. Burnt to death because of his experience, within a day, the Ministry of Religion of the royal court sent a bishop there, who was just 1 level older than a priest. P.S. Introducing this, one is to introduce British witch culture, and the other is to tell everyone that even after the Renaissance and Reformation, ordinary people are still ignorant. Chapter 209, The Continuing Reformation. The witch incidents in recent years made Edward feel that the religious reform in England was not enough, and Anglicanism had not yet fully occupied the dominant position of belief in England. There is also a reason for Henry VIII. It's funny to say that, as the first monarch to implement religious reform, Henry VIII himself was a devout Catholic, and he also disliked Protestantism in his heart. However, the family deserves to be a generation of emperors, in order to have a male heir, marry a new queen, and forcefully carry out religious reforms. The first step is to directly collect the taxes paid by the Church of England to the Pope to the royal family. In the second step, the head of the Church of England is determined by the Pope as the King of England, and the bishops of all regions are appointed with full authority. After that, it was the king who united all the nobles and began to divide the church property according to the agreement reached. 6 floors belonged to the Tudor royal family. 3 floors belonged to local nobles and gentry groups, and 1 floor belonged to those free people, landless peasants, and small landowners. As a result, everyone in England was happy, and social conflicts were greatly eased. The Tudor royal family thus occupied a quarter of the land in England, reaching the largest ever, and the peasant class assigned to land in rural areas gave birth to a new class. Human, the so-called Yamanong, is like the self-cultivating farmers in ancient China. They owned their own land and also leased the land of nobles and squires. Together with artisans, handicraftsmen and small merchants, they constituted the middle class of England. The Tudor royal family, which made the most profits, continued to sell church property at low prices in order to raise military expenses due to the constant war during Henry VIII, which also contributed to the birth of Germanin in Edward's current period. The land owned by the entire royal family has moved from 1/4 to 1/6 of the country, making it the largest landowner in England. The manors of the Tudor royal family are dotted all over England, and they are densely packed. It can be said that this is also the basis for supporting the Tudor royal family's absolute monarchy historically. The three kings, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, sold their land whenever they were short of money. By the end of the Tudor dynasty, the land that the royal family had copied from the church was almost sold out. Of course, Edward is not that stupid. As soon as he took office, he immediately stopped the stupid behavior of selling land, relying on selling wine and opening taverns to support the royal family's expenses for it. Off topic, that is to say, the biggest difference between Anglicanism in England and Catholicism is that its leader is not the Pope, but the King of England. But once the express train of the Reformation landed, it couldn't get off. Now the voices of the people of England for the continuation of the religious reform have not stopped, but have intensified in this regard. Edward decided to continue the religious reform and not let the express train out of his control. So, on September 1, 1549, His Majesty the Great King set up a royal commission at Whitehall Palace. The 9-member Reformation group, led by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, was tasked with enacting canon law and priestly discipline first. Let's introduce the power structure of the Anglican sect. In addition to the nominal head of the king, the Archbishop of Canterbury holds the first power, then the Archbishop of York, and then the bishops of the 44 dioceses, England and Wales. So Archbishop Thomas Cranmer actually holds the power of the Anglican sect, and he is also a Protestant. In return for Bishop Thomas' support of him, Edward appointed him to head the Royal Commission to preside over matters concerning the Reformation. Bishop Thomas was very happy about this. With excitement, he and other committee members reformed Anglicanism to make it different from Catholicism in this regard. On the first day, the Royal Commission discussed the bishop system. Some people think that we should follow the example of Lutheranism and Calvinism in Europe, and remove bishops. That is to say, bishops will no longer be appointed and dismissed by the king, but elected by ordinary priests. In this regard, Bishop Thomas, who has always been more radical, chose to remain silent, and some people agreed. After Edward got the news, he didn't eat any food, and hurried to the Royal Commission to give an impromptu speech. Edward stood in front of the conference table with a serious face, staring at the group of people in front of him. His eyes were stern, and he warned with a cold air, "Enough, gentlemen, the king is the pillar of the reform of the Church of England. A person who does not belong to the king, there is no reason for the existence of the church. And I don't want you to go further and further down a small road that deviates from the main road. I think this is rugged, difficult, and difficult to succeed." After speaking, Edward glanced sharply at the members who proposed to abolish the bishop system, and the corners of his mouth moved slightly after that. Edward gave Bishop Thomas a meaningful look, and then left. Subsequently, these members were removed from the Royal Commission. After a few months, when no one cared about them, these regional bishops disappeared from the world for various reasons, such as falling off a cliff, riding a horse and being trampled to death by a horse, waiting for all kinds of strange ways to die. If their proposal is passed, Edward's control over the Anglican sect will be infinitely reduced. A religious organization that is not controlled by the king is the most unbearable for the monarchs. After leaving a few, Edward changed a few obedient ones, and after he finished his meal, the committee sent a message. After the unanimous consent of the committee members, Anglican continued to adopt the bishop system of the 16th Ecumenical Council of Constance, 1414 to 1418 AD. During this meeting, Pope Martin V's prime minister, Bishop Saskagunas, announced a new Catholic order. The Protestant order is divided into priests and deacons. The ranks of priests are priest, bishop, assistant bishop, diocesan bishop, archbishop, archbishop, and cardinal. The chief assistant deacon, the director deacon, and the prime minister deacon rank 7, known as the 7th rank of deacon. Of course, the archbishop and privy bishop, the directors and deacons are currently abolished temporarily, and they can be re-established when the territory expands. The new canon stipulates that in England and any dependent territories of England, His Majesty the King of England is the sole head and leader of the church, and no one in the church may violate the king's orders. Any office in the church is and must be appointed by His Majesty the King. The appointment and removal by any organization or individual has no legal effect and is not recognized. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210: The Continuing Reformation. In addition, Edward also changed the title belonging to the king from the title of Supreme Leader of the Anglican Church to Supreme Administrator of the British Parliament. Moreover, under Edward's suggestion, the committee also passed a general rule that all those who serve as teaching staff must swear with their own conscience before God. His Majesty the King is the sole supreme magistrate of this country, whether in religious and ecclesiastical affairs, or in secular affairs. This is the case, within the territory of this kingdom, any foreign monarch, individual, bishop, state, or ruler, in church or religious affairs neither has nor shall have any right to stewardship, dominion, leadership, or authority. In this way, the judicial tribunal of the whole church was vested in Edward, who would oversee Anglicanism. Moreover, it also stipulates that anyone who refuses to swear allegiance to His Majesty the King will lose his salary and position. Those who insist on the authority of the Pope will be deprived of their property, and if they do not change their position, they will be severely punished according to crimes of contempt and treason, to the death penalty of course. These are just the most important ones. Many more clauses were put together to form this act on the authority of the king, which was called the Supreme Act, which was perfected and proposed by the Royal Commission, and finally passed in both the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The passage of the bill fully established a king's authority and management rights over the Anglican sect, making the somewhat dissociated Anglican sect completely under the king's control. Of course, these are not ideas of Edward alone, but have been improved by referring to Elizabeth I's Supreme Act. Looking at the 10 or so pages of bills in front of him, these are the clauses establishing the king's authority in the church, including various requirements and punishment methods. Edward was finally satisfied, the king was satisfied, and then the members of the Royal Commission also seized the time to start drafting more Protestant measures. First of all, the committee members were deadlocked around the condition, and the scene was very tense for a while, and the meeting had to be stopped in this regard. Our Majesty the King is very curious, what bill is so important that the members of the Royal Commission have come to such a stalemate? After Edward understood, he silently drew a circle in his heart. The point of contention among the members of the various committees was whether priests should be allowed to marry. In this regard, conservatives believe that only those who keep their bodies pure can serve God, and those who cannot even protect their own purity cannot shepherd God's sheep. Moreover, they believe that only by fully devoting themselves to serving God can they approach God and understand the Lord's will. In fact, the main reason for this regulation is to prevent the teaching property from being swallowed up by the second generation of the teaching. Before the 11th century, priests were allowed to get married. In the 11th century, when the Pope set an example, the Church stipulated that clerics were not allowed to marry. Of course, this method is quite effective, and it has indeed prevented the teaching property from falling into the hands of the second generation of teaching. Even the now decaying Roman Church has not abolished this regulation when it comes to Protestantism. However, it is very different. You must know that in Protestant countries, the nobles generally divided the religious property, and their rights were greatly reduced. Without the religious property, the priests also lost most of the opportunities to make money, so it doesn't matter whether they get married or not. So Edward thought it over, and decided to allow the priests to marry. The reason is that most of the teaching property of the Church of England is currently in the hands of the Tudor royal family and nobles. Besides, what a lot of advantages it would be to allow priests to marry. First, it can allow Edward to gain the favor of most of the English priests and collect a lot of people's hearts. The second is to bring England closer to Protestant countries. When Henry VIII just reformed, England was the beacon of the Protestant countries. After a while, those countries saw the true face of England and knew that it was just a change of skin but not a bone, and the sense of distance was distance. These Protestant countries are a good counterweight to France, a pawn of the Catholic country. With the help of the king, the committee members crossed this threshold very well. A series of bills reforming the Catholic Church followed. Among them, they have made detailed regulations on various religious rituals, such as communion, anointing, confession, and even the location of the altar and the priest's clothing, which is closer to the mainland Protestantism. For example, the worship ceremony with the participation of the congregation, the public collective prayer ceremony, and the pastor's public preaching are adopted. For example, the public participation in worship ceremonies and public collective prayers are adopted to facilitate the priest's public preaching. The cumbersome Mass ceremony is changed to a simple communion ceremony. The Catholic transubstantiation is abandoned, and the symbolic meaning of the crucifixion of Jesus is adopted. A series of articles on missionary and religious rights, known as the Second Book of Common Prayer, which is different from the First Book of Common Prayer dominated by Duke Edward. The so-called Book of Common Prayer, it is not the Bible. Nor is it another book to replace the Bible. It can be said that it is a book that teaches you how to understand the Bible and how to practice etiquette to worship God. The publication of the Second Book of Common Prayer laid the foundation for Anglicanism. That is, it severed the connection with Catholicism. You can even get married. The way of worshiping God is different from the robes. And you can't get close to the Catholic Church. It's like two twin brothers. Although both were born to the same parents and look similar, their habits and thinking are completely different. These two people are independent of each other. If we say that the book with the largest number of prints in this era must be the Bible, its popularity is the greatest. Every small church will have several copies of the Bible. Moreover, when priests preach and preach, the Bible is a must. Edward also thought that in a few years, the Bible and the Book of Common Prayer would be written in English. This will certainly promote the emergence of English nationalism. The current European language is Latin, and the text is Latin. Basically every priest knows Latin. Otherwise you can't even read the Bible. And when England has its own language and characters, then this country is unique and will definitely generate national centripetal force. The King of England is the best representative of this nation. Of course, it is not appropriate to write the Bible in English at present, as its writing and language system are incomplete. Besides, Scotland and Ireland have not been completely conquered, so writing the Bible in English will definitely not pass. So, just wait a few years before taking action. Let's use Latin for now. Chapter 211 Paper Mill. The Second Book of Common Prayer was sent to Parliament by Royal Commission. The first is the House of Commons. For the House of Commons, as long as it is not related to taxation, it will agree without saying a word. The same is true of the House of Lords. Nobles and senior priests dare not disobey the king's order, and the proposal passed smoothly. Therefore, on September 5, 1549, the Privy Council promulgated this religious act in the name of the king, ordering all churches and monasteries to follow. At this point, how could Edward give up this good opportunity to make money? He asked a printing house belonging to the royal family to print out 10,000 copies of the new Book of Common Prayer within a week. Of course, the new Book of Common Prayer only costs £5, thanks to the fine paper and fewer typos. That's right, it only costs £5. Compared with the previous Bibles that cost 10 or even hundreds of pounds, it is indeed a child's play. Such a reasonable price is within the tolerance of small churches in rural areas. Although a lot of church property has been eliminated, there are still some books to buy after hundreds of years of accumulation. 10,000 copies, that is £50,000, and the cost of each book is less than 1 shilling, that is to say, the total cost is only £500, so the profit is £49,500. Really profitable? Yes, Your Majesty. After all are sold, the rest will be sold one after another, and the final total profit will be around £80,000. After all, nobles and gentlemen will definitely buy a copy. The middle-aged man standing in front of Edward was the general manager of a printing factory. After the factory was acquired by Edward, he became the general manager of the Royal Printing Factory. He was about 30 years old, with dry skin, slightly curly hair, with a dry yellow smell, dark blue eyes, pursed lips, bowed waist, and joy in his eyes. Really? This is indeed a good idea. Then you can continue to print about 5,000 copies. Looking at the manager in front of him who made an opinion, Edward felt a little satisfied. A manager who can give full play to his subjective initiative is not bad. Your Majesty, I implore you to allow the printing plant and paper mill to continue to expand. The current production capacity can no longer meet incoming orders. As the general manager of the printing factory, Wilson certainly hoped that the factory under his hands would be stronger, so that His Majesty the King would value him more. Seeing His Majesty's probing gaze, Wilson lowered his head slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Your Majesty, because the paper we produce is smooth, delicate, and flawless, orders from Rome, Germany, and even France have been thrown at us. The production of Bibles alone has reached as many as 10,000 copies per month, not to mention there are other books. The printing factory can still catch up, but the paper factory is hard to follow, so I hope Your Majesty will allow you to expand the size of the paper factory. Regarding the proposal of the manager of the printing factory in front of him, Edward had to think carefully. In 1450, the German Gutenberg invented Gothic Latin metal movable type printing technology in his factory in Mainz, but in 1462, there was turmoil in Mainz. The factory was destroyed in the war, and the printers were scattered all over Germany, spreading Gutenberg's improved metal movable type printing to all parts of Europe. Therefore, in this era, European printing was even more advanced than that of the Ming Dynasty at that time, but papermaking was incomparable with China. Although papermaking was introduced to the Arab world after the Talas War, the price of paper in Europe was extremely expensive after the Mongols went west. The first hemp paper mill was established in Italy in 1276, but until the 18th century, the level of papermaking in Europe had not yet reached the standard of the Song dynasty. It was not until the Qianlong period that Zhang Yuan, a French painter and Jesuit priest who worked for the Qing court, drew pictures of China's papermaking technology and sent them back to Paris. China's advanced papermaking technology was widely spread in Europe. It can be said that in this era, the papermaking technology in Edward's hands is the most advanced technology in Europe, and it is a great money-making technology in this regard. Edward directly set up the paper mill in the Duke of Lancaster, his directly subordinate territory, to prevent technology from being stolen as a territory directly under the royal family. Every plant and tree in the territory is familiar, and it is not easy to steal it. However, people died for money and birds died for food. In order to obtain a lot of money, the guards guarding the paper mill did not know how many spies were killed and captured, from France, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, and even people from Russia can see how attractive papermaking is. Of course, the paper mill also brought a lot of wealth to Edward. Adhering to the king's intention, the paper mill sells the paper at a price of 1 shilling per sheet, and each person can sell up to 100 sheets if it is open for sale. Then the printing house will not have much work. After all, the Bible is divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it needs about 1,000 sheets of paper. Even so, the printing house's monthly Bible orders are slowly declining. Yes, I will order the paper mill to expand. Edward nodded, expressing approval of his proposal. I will inject £5,000 into your printing house, which should be enough. Wilson laughed happily and nodded quickly. £5,000 is enough to acquire 7 or 8 printing houses. In this way, the Royal Printing House is basically the largest printing house in England, and its profits will rise in a straight line. Mr. Wilson, I hope you will continue to work hard, don't limit your eyes to England, and strive for more orders from other countries. Looking at this shrewd manager, Edward said encouragingly, with affirmation in his eyes, yes, Your Majesty, I will not betray your trust. I will make the Royal Paper Mill the largest printing factory in England, no, in Europe. He couldn't help being flattered to see His Majesty the King's tone so kind. Wilson mustered up his courage and assured him loudly, okay, I hope you can fulfill your promise. The royal family will not disappoint a person who has contributed like you. Edward nodded with satisfaction. The smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and he simply made a promise then. Wilson's mood was like a flying bird, rippling directly in the air, with indescribable surprise. As if the king of a country promises so much, then it cannot be an ordinary reward, maybe a residence in London, or dozens of acres of land. In short, these are all things that Wilson dreams of, and achieving any one is enough for him in his dream. Wake up laughing. However, Edward seemed to have done an ordinary thing. He concluded that as a monarch, you must be able to draw big pies, so that the people under you will work harder. As for cashing out, let's talk about it later. He's thinking about one thing now, it's Christmas. Chapter 212 Return. At the end of the month, ask for tickets, ask for subscriptions. As we all know, Christmas is on December 25th every year, which is the day when most Christians around the world commemorate the birth of Jesus. However, the church did not have Christmas at the beginning, and it did not exist until about 100 years after Jesus ascended to heaven. It is said that the first Christmas was held in 138 AD by the Bishop of Rome, St. Carigate. The first Christmas in church history was in 336 AD. Since the Bible does not clearly record when Jesus was born, Christmas dates vary from place to place. It was not until AD 440 that December 25th was designated by the Holy See as Christmas. It was not until 1607 AD that church leaders from all over the world gathered in Bethlehem to further confirm it. Since then, most Christians in the world regard December 25th as Christmas. At this time of Christmas, it has no Christmas tree, no Christmas cards, and no Santa Claus. Thanks to the Reformation, on this day, except for going to church to pray, Edward can arrange other time by himself in order to surprise Princess Elizabeth and little Lolita. Edward specially spent hundreds of pounds to prepare a huge fireworks display in the backyard of Whitehall Palace, and this is not only a benefit for the royal family, all Londoners can see it. It can be said to be a feast for the whole city. Of course, for Sue Wire and others, all these beautiful scenes will be missed since December 25th is Christmas. Edward asked the central government and the city government to take a 5-day holiday, except for the necessary guards since Sewell, Crowks, and Wilson came to London in March. They haven't been home for nearly 9 months, which made their homesickness even more serious in this regard. They asked their leaders for another 5 days of leave, making up 10 days, 6 days back and forth, 4 days at home is enough. Instead of renting a car when they came to London, all three of them bought a carriage and hired a driver. Well, how is your port hall doing? Although there were 3 carriages, the 3 of them still sat in the same carriage, and the other 2 were empty. Looking at the smiling Seymour, Wilson patted him on the shoulder and asked, "Oh, it's okay, just supervise the smuggling and tax payment, as well as health and safety, not too busy." Seymour quickly came out of his fantasy and said casually, "You still lied to me. I've heard that you have a beautiful maid by your side." Tisk tisk. It was such a comfortable day. Wilson looked at this little friend with contempt, and sighed. "Do you think so, Kellerau?" After speaking, Wilson asked Kellerau again. "Yes, I've heard that too." Kellerau immediately affirmed with a smile on his face. "Wilson, why did you get clerics out of your way?" Seymour said, looking at the 2 people with teasing expressions, amusedly. "Okay, don't talk about me anymore. I heard that you are now a captain in the urban management department, and you are in charge of dozens of people. That's a prestige. If you stomp your feet, the whole of London will go crazy." Seymour quickly changed the subject, talked about Wilson, and said enviously, "Haha. I'm nothing." Wilson was praised by Seymour. His face was flushed with a faint red light, his chin was raised, and he was very arrogant. Wilson was only smiling, his face was ruddy. "Mine is nothing. I heard that Kellerau has directly become the sheriff of the 1,000-household district, and he is in charge of thousands of people." Seymour did not expect that among the few people, the best mixed person was actually Kellerau, who was boring, which was surprising. "Oh my God, Kellerau, you gave me a big surprise." Seymour looked at Kellerau, who was giggling with a complex expression, and said exaggeratedly, "It's nothing, it's just that there is a shortage of people, and it's my turn. I was originally in the Population and Household Registration Administration department." Seeing the envious gazes from his 2 companions, Kellerau felt very happy in his heart. After all, he was always the most useless of the 3, but who knew that he was the best among the 3, which made him very proud. Although there was a smile on his face, he still said modestly, "In the future, the 3 of us still need to support each other. The water in London is still too deep." Wilson inserted a sentence at this time, which resonated with the 3 of them. Then the 3 raised their heads and looked at each other. Looking at the familiar faces, they couldn't help laughing. The strangeness between the 3 of them disappeared in an instant. In this way, the 3 of them chatted and played games on the same carriage during the day to connect with each other, rested in a simple hotel at night, and then continued on their way during the day. 3 days passed in a flash, and the relationship between the 3 of them was back to normal, and they even got closer because of their interests. In 1549, on December 23rd, they came to the outside of Norwich City. The 3 of them sat back in their own carriages, passed through the city gate together, and said goodbye to each other. After setting a time to gather, the 3 carriages returned to their own house door under the guidance of Seymour. The coachman drove the carriage slowly, turning around and coming to Blacksmith Street. Coming here, Seymour felt that the temperature in the whole air has increased by 5 or 6 degrees. In this winter, the temperature here may be around 20 degrees. This is the temperature he is familiar with, and it has accompanied him through more than a dozen winters. Even though he was in the carriage, Seymour could still hear the ding-dong-dong-dong sound and the sizzle of water vapor evaporating. In this regard, Seymour was overjoyed for a moment, and his longing for his parents buried him like a tide. Just in front, there is a blacksmith's shop with a white hammer and words written on it, "Stop there." Outside the shops on both sides of Blacksmith Street, strong and sweaty blacksmiths stretched out their heads to look at this rare carriage. Basically, no one who came to Blacksmith Street to buy ironware brought a carriage in. The street is only 8 feet, about 2 meters 4, wide. If you come in with a 6-foot wide carriage, it will not delay people's business. It also delayed the business on the opposite side. Therefore, everyone looked at it curiously, and silently scolded a fool in their hearts, waiting for a good show. Following everyone's gaze, the carriage slowly stopped at the gate of old Will's house. Then, a well-dressed and well-groomed young man got off the carriage with a very familiar face. "Wait, everyone, take a closer look. Isn't this the little guy from Seymour? He is back?" It turned out that he really became an official. Countless fantasies arose in everyone's minds, but one thing is for sure, Seymour is really good outside. Therefore, people in the whole street gathered around, staring at the carriage and Seymour carefully. Chapter 213 IN number 039, am back. Facing the spectators of many neighbors, Seymour did not show the slightest timidity. Instead, he puffed up his chest and raised his chin with a proud and arrogant expression. Not to mention, these neighbors really liked this. "If you still look timid and cowardly, They may still be wondering if you are cheating or not. Combined with fine clothes and a spacious carriage, the impression of sudden prosperity is immediately imprinted on people's minds. This can be regarded as a feature of the age of discovery. People no longer pursue high morals and sentiments. Instead, they look at the vulgar businessmen differently, and even envy them. People's pursuit of wealth has reached the point of extreme desire. What's more, they no longer pay attention to how your wealth comes from, even if it is stealing, robbing, or even murder and arson. As long as you have money, they will treat you differently and worship you. In this way, people's pursuit of wealth is further stimulated, which is why the priests who accompanied the army did not care when the colonists mercilessly massacred the Aborigines, because it was the moral climate of the time. Seymour, have you really become an official? An ant with a bucket figure and crowded facial features asked tentatively to the pompous Seymour. Of course, I was not only received by His Majesty the King in London. As he spoke, Seymour's eyes drifted away, looking longing, but the people around all took a breath. My God, His Majesty the King, who has always existed in legends, actually received Seymour. Isn't it true? Regarding Seymour's words, people couldn't help but doubt, waiting for his next words. I was also received by the Lord Mayor of London, and I became an official of the city government, managing all the ports in London. Faced with the questioning eyes of the neighbors, Seymour couldn't wait to reveal his official position, and got the surprised voice of the neighbors. Seeing Seymour full of air, the neighbors had to remove the thin and studious Seymour from their hearts, leaving this Seymour who became a high official. Seymour, you are amazing. I knew that Seymour would be successful. God must have blessed you. After Seymour's words, these neighbors stared at him immediately, and continued to compliment Seymour, throwing all kinds of good words without money, which made Seymour feel refreshed. At this time, the noise outside the door also spread to the inner room, and the blacksmiths Old Will and Little Will came out with doubts, and saw the well-dressed Sewell and the neighbors talking a lot. Old Will, you are blessed. After seeing Old Will come out, a strong man shouted in a thick, round voice. This sentence immediately woke up Seymour, who was enjoying himself, and the others slowly retreated knowingly. This is the time for their family. But Old Will was taken aback by this sentence. He didn't understand what it meant. The same is true for Little Will on the side. Seeing his father and elder brother in a daze, Seymour hurried over and greeted them energetically. Father, big brother. Seymour's clear and thick voice sounded in the ears of Old Will and his son. You are my Seymour? Old Will really couldn't connect the gentleman in front of him with his thin and ordinary little son. His tone was full of disbelief. Yes, I'm Seymour. I'm back. Seymour nodded heavily to his father and elder brother with joy. Okay. My Seymour is back. What a pleasant day. Old Will happily patted his youngest son on the shoulder, his tone full of excitement and surprise. Well, Sewell, the carriage. Little Will looked at his handsome younger brother, pointed at the carriage in front of the door, and asked cautiously, This is mine. I bought it from London. Seymour glanced at the carriage and said casually, and Seymour's words brought Old Will's eyes to the carriage next to him, the simple and honest coachman, and the strong brown horse. After seeing these, Old Will fully believed that his son was really promising, and Little Will was completely attracted by the big brown horse. For those who have dreamed of being a knight since childhood, owning a horse of their own is the most basic requirement. It's a pity that although the Smith family is richer than ordinary people, it is unbearable to spend dozens of pounds for a horse. Looking at his brother's eager eyes, Seymour said with a smile, Well, you can go and see. Little Will immediately showed a simple and honest smile, and walked slowly towards the brown horse. It was a merry night at Blacksmith Smith's, full of joy and laughter. Seymour also saw his mother, elder sister-in-law, second brother and second sister-in-law, and several lovely nephews and nieces. The family is also very happy to have a brother who is an official, and the atmosphere gets along very well in this way. On December 25th, Christmas Day, early in the morning, Seymour and others came to a nearby church in a carriage. To be honest, Sewell originally planned to go to Norwich Cathedral to pray, but I heard that there were so many people there that I might not be able to squeeze in. Let's follow the usual custom and go to a nearby church. Arriving at this somewhat ordinary church, the family, accompanied by neighbors and acquaintances, prayed under the leadership of the priest. The morning flew by, and in the afternoon, Sewell thought that he could gather in church, participate in a grand masquerade ball, and watch pantomime performances as in previous years. Yes, that's right. After the Reformation in England at that time, all kinds of conservative customs almost disappeared. Who knew that after lunch, there was no masquerade in the church, but a theater performance instead? This made Seymour a little surprised. He didn't expect that the popular theatre performances in London could be seen in Norwich, which made him very curious, to be honest. In London, this drama trend caused by His Majesty the King has become a popular show for men, women and children in London. In order to keep up with the fashion, he also went there several times. In this era of lack of spiritual entertainment, watching dramas is indeed a kind of enjoyment. Moreover, what surprised Seymour was that those noble children whose family names appear in the drama are often more excited, and this is often their capital to boast in front of their companions. In this regard, Seymour watched Henry VIII with his family with anticipation in one afternoon. The whole play was only performed for 1/3. Although it can't be compared with the actors in London, it is already very good for Norwich. Seymour looked around and looked at the excited red-faced crowd, and couldn't help sighing. Chapter 214, Rewarding the Army and Reforming. Even when people from all over England gathered to celebrate Christmas, Edward was not idle. After accompanying Elizabeth and the others to Westminster Abbey for prayers and lunch, Edward urgently ordered Luna to load the food and drinks that had been prepared into the carriage. In fact, after becoming king, Edward understood a truth that the army will always be the most important pillar to maintain the rule. There is a saying that states power out of the barrel of a gun. A king without an army is not a real king. After 1688, the reason why the power of the British king became worse day by day was because the Parliament deprived the royal family of the right to rule over the army. This made the Parliament completely control the army. And even the navy, which had been controlled by the royal family, was not spared. With the army, you can control the Parliament and thus have the power to tax, instead of just relying on the king's own prestige. For example, the later Lord Protector Cromwell. When he ruled the United Kingdom, the Parliament was completely reduced to a puppet, and he was allowed to need it. This is why the Parliament supported the restoration of the Stuart dynasty in the future, and it was only after Cromwell's death that he dared to support the restoration of the king. Therefore, the Parliament has always prevented the king from having a standing army, just to prevent the king from monopolizing power. However, Edward used the expansion of the guards to circumvent this restriction, so as to achieve the same purpose. Why did the Parliament agree to the king's expansion of the guards? First, because the power of the Tudor king became stronger and stronger, and it was difficult for members of Parliament to resist this power. The second is because they thought that the royal family did not have enough money to support the guards. According to Henry VIII's period, it is indeed the case. £10,000 a month, £120,000 a year, which is half of the royal family's annual income, and cannot be supported. However, when they were making good-looking jokes, they were taken aback by Edward's handwriting. That's why the Parliament agreed with Edward's political exchange, and handed over the subsidy to the central government forever, with an army of 5,000 people on the side. And they didn't have that much guts. This is also due to the fact that the local militias are not completely controlled by the local gentlemen. In order to express His Majesty's concern for the guards, Edward specially asked Luna to prepare 100 pigs, 500 sheep, and thousands of chickens to reward these loyal troops. Of course, these sumptuous foods were only part of it. In order to create an image of the king's generosity, Edward directly gave £1 to each soldier and £5 to the officers as a reward. In this way, Edward directly lost about £10,000, which was almost a month's cost of the guards. Knowing that His Majesty the King was coming, the whole army became lively and chaotic, which directly annoyed Knight Alexander, reprimanded him sharply, and then calmed down. Everyone stood on the playground, with their heads held high as much as possible, to accept His Majesty's review. Edward rode on the white horse Arthur, past the guards lined up with a smile on his face, and nodded from time to time. In the eyes of the soldiers, this was the best compliment for them. It was at the end of the military parade that Edward stepped onto the stage and said confidently, "My soldiers, as your king, I am very satisfied with your performance, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Your Majesty." The soldiers below, led by the officers, cheered enthusiastically, and the scene was very lively for a while. In order to reward you brave soldiers, I brought some food and spirits to comfort your stomachs. Seeing that the atmosphere was almost over, Edward pressed his hands, and the soldiers immediately fell silent. Continued, "Of course, these are just appetizers." Edward stopped the cheers that were about to rise, and then said with a smile, "Brave soldiers of the guards, in order to thank you for your loyalty to the royal family over the past year, today everyone can get £1 as a year-end reward, and the officers will get £5, which is what you deserve." Next, without the leadership of the officers, all the soldiers shouted excitedly, "Long live your Majesty! Long live your Majesty! Long live your Majesty!" In this way, it lasted for a minute before the scene calmed down, but Edward enjoyed the cheering sound very much. "Okay. My soldiers, go to the quartermaster, the gold and gold coins are waiting for you, Under the temptation of Edward, the soldiers left the playground one after another, and walked quickly to the position of the quartermaster. Seeing this, Edward shook his head with a wry smile. Sure enough, the guards were still a feudal army, and only had money in their eyes. He just wanted to test the discipline of the guards, whether they could act independently without the consent of the officers. Sure enough, not as he expected, the so-called feudal army is lax in military discipline, advocating personal force, that is, if you have milk, you are a mother. They are loyal to money. When you have no money, they will leave you and fall into the arms of the enemy. Moreover, its loss ratio is only 2 or 3 floors, and at this point, it will collapse. The modern army is characterized by team spirit. Replacing individuals with the whole, soldiers are honed into machines that execute orders one by one. There is only one thinking and one command in an army. Moreover, due to the rise of modern nationalism, the army has also produced some national thinking. For example, the King of France cannot be recognized by British soldiers, nor will he accept employment from enemy countries. Compared with a feudal army, the proportion of casualties suffered by the modern army is as high as 7 or 8 layers. At the time of the American Civil War, the British soldiers stepped on the drums without changing their expressions and marched forward with the artillery. After reaching the effective range, almost half of them died, but the British army still fired in an orderly manner, which looked terrible. Of course, all current armies in Europe are feudal armies, and Edward's failure of the test is no cause for disappointment. In this way, Edward's idea of reforming the military system was further promoted. While walking on the road, Edward kept thinking about various reform measures in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the more excited he became. He could almost imagine the scene where he defeated Spain and France. Thinking of doing it, Edward stopped thinking, and said to the Alexander Knight who was accompanying him with a serious face, "Mr. Knight, call all the high-level officers. I have something important to announce." "Yes, Your Majesty." Alexander performed the knight salute, and went to prepare with his mind full of doubts. He didn't care what the king wanted to do, as long as he did as he was told. Chapter 215 Army Reform. Don't underestimate the business people's sense of business opportunities. When Edward dragged the pigs and chickens to the barracks road, the nearby small vendors brought all kinds of goods to the barracks and set up a temporary shop tent, ready to take out the rewards from the soldiers. The soldiers happily carried the £1 they were allotted, and rushed to the established shops near the barracks, and couldn't wait to start the journey of enjoyment. Among them, the coquettish buttocks and stumbled women, the clear and fragrant wine, and the lively casino. These are the 3 favorite places of the soldiers. Moreover, most of the soldiers are bachelors, and it is considered generous to spend money. Which is why the merchants came here without hesitation. In this regard, Edward has nothing to do. This is a characteristic of this era, and he can only get as much benefit as possible. Therefore, the city government has also made the necessary treatment. Facing such a consumer market, the paunchy tax official also patrolled step by step. His eyes were unusually sharp, and he refused to let go of a loophole. In other words, most of the money Edward sent out went back to the city government. After a roundabout as a high-level member of the Guards, Knight Baron Baldwin feels that his current life is extremely comfortable. His monthly salary has reached £10. In the past, he was quite envious of those knights who had feudal lands. They could be domineering in the feudal lands, which was not comfortable. Only now do I understand that when the war comes, they have to prepare their own soldiers and armor to serve His Majesty the King. For this alone, the money accumulated in a year is not enough. How can they be more comfortable now? Gently picking up a handful of oatmeal, Baron put it in front of a strong black horse, and watched the horse chewing relish with a smile on his face, and a flower burst into a smile on his face. "Mr. Knight, His Majesty has summoned you to discuss matters in the main tent." A panting orderly came, with sweat on his forehead, and said out of breath, "Okay. I'll go right away. Take care of my horse for me." Baron glanced at the big black horse that was eating delicious food, said to the groom beside him, and strode away alone. In this regard, the orderly did not dare to rest, and continued to run non-stop. Baron stroked his beard and wondered what it meant to hold a meeting at Christmas. Could it be that there was going to be another war? He thought silently in his heart, and soon, he came to the main tent, saluted His Majesty the King and Knight Alexander, who were smiling, found the place that belonged to him, and stood down with a bow. After a while, all the high-level officials, that is, more than 30 high-level guards, arrived, and the main tent was crowded, but it seemed a little silent. "Everyone, as the royal guards, I am satisfied with your performance." Edward looked around, and after getting a hint from Alexander Knight, he said loudly, facing the king's praise. Each knight raised his chest as much as possible, and the pride on his face was hard to suppress. However, you have to understand that if you are dealing with those savages in Scotland, you are indeed more than enough. However, compared with the Spaniards, or even the French, you are nothing more than that, and you are hard to resist. It is considered capable to be able to retreat completely, let alone victory. Edward's face was full of seriousness, and he hit the knights in front of him word by word, showing contempt in his words for the king's faceless blow. Baron and the other knights who had fought with Henry VIII for many years immediately blushed, and they seemed quite agitated. Edward estimated in his heart that if he was not the king, he might be beaten so hard that he could not take care of himself, and the Alexander knight on the side couldn't help shaking his face. He was obviously a little angry in this regard. Everyone, don't say how brave you are. If bravery is useful, why didn't the previous king take back the territory that was taken by the royal family? Looking at the knights who were about to move their mouths, Edward directly blocked their excuses. Don't say that our longbowmen are powerful. No matter how powerful they are, they can't make us open the French cavalry who are like iron barrels. Edward's voice became louder and louder. Hearing it in the ears of the knights, it made them lower their proud heads even more. Also, I don't know if everyone has discovered it. The appearance of the arquebus has gradually dissipated the advantages of our longbowmen. Will we never be able to win in the future? As far as I know, the Spanish army is equipped with a large number of matchlock guns. I can't imagine the scene of a battle. Edward picked up a matchlock gun from the attendant next to him, raised it above his head, asked sharply, and then sighed. The knights also looked up one after another, looking at the raised arquebus. Their eyes became more and more complicated. They also all knew that although the range of the arquebus was still not comparable to that of the longbow, and it was accompanied by various shortcomings, sooner or later, it would catch up with the longbow and crush it. Moreover, due to Henry VIII's many years of fighting, the folk longbowmen were almost exhausted in this regard. The knights did not want to open their eyes and talk nonsense, and could only express silence. Edward looked at the suppressed knight and couldn't help but nodded, facing these knights of his father's generation. If he wanted to reform, it would be difficult to succeed without their support. After all, the army is different from the government. Edward has never fought a battle and lacks prestige. Moreover, they are used to the original tactics, and if they change it rashly, they may be unanimously resisted. Seeing that these knights basically lowered their heads, Edward nodded to Knight Alexander. The Alexander knight smiled slightly on his handsome face, expressing his understanding, and then slowly walked up to the knights. But Edward took a step back. Gentlemen, His Majesty the King has made it clear that at present our English army is inferior to the French, and our navy is inferior to Spain. If we don't want to make progress, the only way to wait for England is to perish. Are we going to sit and wait for death? Question mark. Alexander Knight's voice is still as magnetic as ever, full of masculine charm. Anyone who hears it will be satisfied. What a pity. Edward sighed slightly in his heart. We wanted to, but we can't find a way now. Baron said, a little depressed, and won the approval of all the knights, and everyone expressed their helplessness. That's why His Majesty the King summoned everyone to come and announced to everyone that at present, the guards need a reform. Chapter 216 Spanish Phalanx. As soon as they heard about the reform, everyone suddenly realized that we were not here to be criticized by the king, but were summoned to carry out reform. After this understanding, everyone can relax, as long as they are not criticized afterwards. Their eyes focused on Edward's thin body, and they bent slightly, waiting for His Majesty the King's speech. My gentlemen knights, Knight Alexander is right. We really need a reform, military reform, so that we can regain the glory that belongs to England. In the failed 100 Years' War, the group of Frenchmen who relied on women to win the war are still talking about that victory. This is our shame, Edward said in a sad and indignant tone, full of words to many knights. Speaking of the 100 Years' War, the British were aggrieved. As they were about to occupy France, a village girl named Joan of Arc appeared and defeated them. This became an indelible shame for the British. Next, with the strength of the knights, Edward announced the reforms he wanted to carry out. Of course, Edward used the excuse that he learned the content of this military system reform from Spain. In this regard, the knights have nothing to say. Although the strength of the Spanish army is not fully understood, it has been able to compete with France for so many years, and its strength is actually good. Next, Edward moved out the Spanish phalanx. Of course, this is different from the current Spanish phalanx. To be precise, this is the Spanish phalanx in 1578. The Spanish phalanx actually started in 1505 and evolved and improved until 1705. And Edward chose the 1578 version, which is not too unrealistic. The Spanish phalanx was actually improved from the Roman phalanx, except that it eliminated sword and shield soldiers, halberd soldiers, etc., and only kept spearmen and musketeers. Of course, the Spaniards call it a phalanx, and you can't be the same, so Edward changed the phalanx to a regiment. Edward made the following reforms. The Guards had 2 regiments and a special company of cavalry. Each regiment has a total of about 2,600 people, with 10 spearmen companies and 2 musketeer companies, each with 250 people. The reason why there are only 2 musketeers is because the current matchlock guns are not powerful enough. The cavalry company has 500 people, with a company commander. Other same as below. Among them is the head of the regiment, whose function is to command the infantry phalanx and have a personal guard of 8 people. The phalanx leader is also the captain of the first company. Usually the infantry phalanx will be named after him, such as Mendoza, Zuniga, Velasco, Mendrigan, a sergeant major. Function: second-level commander of the infantry phalanx. He was responsible for the tactical organization of the infantry phalanx and served as the captain of the second company quartermaster department. The leader is the quartermaster, responsible for the financial work of the infantry phalanx, as well as the management of food and weapons, with 3 assistants. Gendarmerie: the leader is the gendarmerie chief, who is responsible for maintaining military discipline and has 6 assistants. Edward also stipulated that the chief of the gendarmerie could kill officers who did not obey military orders during wartime, including regimental commanders. There is also a necessary for the army. Priests set up a chaplaincy office, 1 chief priest, 2 ordinary chaplains set up supervisors, responsible for supervising military affairs, and recording military incidents, returning to the headquarters to check whether the military has violated regulations. Set up a medical office, a chief medical officer and several doctors are responsible for treating wounded soldiers. Set up a drummer office, in charge of all the musicians in the infantry phalanx and responsible for delivering military orders. These, including the head of the regiment, are all permanent members of the Spanish phalanx. They are the core of the phalanx, with a total of 29 people. With them, a phalanx can be re-established. The companies at the grassroots level all have the same rank of officers, organized as follows: 1 company commander and his followers, 1 flag bearer, 3 musicians, 1 document, 1 chaplain and 1 barber, 11 in total. Each company is subdivided into squads of up to 25 people, led by a squad leader. This is organized according to the Spanish phalanx, a new model of the Guards, which only adds a cavalry company of 500 people. That is to say, the Guard army of 5,000 people is still not enough, so Edward decided to call another 700 people from the orphan army and the dukedom. After Edward's detailed explanation, the knights also nodded, expressing their understanding that this organization has many similarities with the current English army and can be adapted. Looking at the knights who expressed their approval, Edward coughed and continued, "As the saying goes, every flock must have a head sheep, so the 2 newly formed regiments must have a head sheep." Seeing His Majesty's obvious hint, the crowd couldn't be indifferent, and looked at His Majesty eagerly. Their eyes almost melted regarding this. Edward did not look sideways, and said in a steady tone, "Since Knight Alexander usually manages the Guards in an orderly manner, I am very satisfied. Hereby, I declare, Knight Alexander is the commander of the 1st Regiment of the Guards." Edward immediately looked at the handsome Alexander Knight, and asked softly, "Alexander Knight, are you willing to accept this glorious mission?" "It's my honor, Your Majesty." Knight Alexander was stunned for a while, then immediately reacted, half kneeling on the ground, and said peacefully, "In this regard, Edward is very clear. This knight really wants nothing. There are not many things in the world that can move him." Edward nodded, and after Knight Alexander stood up, he approached more than 30 high-ranking guards in front of him, including 18 court knights. Looking at the people who were about to move, Edward looked carefully again, and almost drew everyone's hearts out. "The commander of the 2nd Regiment of the Guards is Knight Alvin," Edward announced loudly. Immediately, a handsome middle-aged man who looked upright among the crowd came out, knelt down on one knee in front of Edward, raised his head, and said excitedly, "Thank you for your appointment, Your Majesty. It is my duty to serve you." "An honor." Alvin Knight had a look of emotion on his face, making Edward nod in satisfaction. Before everyone arrived, Edward discussed with Knight Alexander about the position of head of the 2nd Regiment, and Alexander recommended this upright knight, that is, the old-fashioned knight. It can be said that he strictly abides by the knight's code of conduct at ordinary times, which can be said to be rigid. People like to be friends with him, and he is very popular. After all, honest people are trustworthy. Edward likes this kind of people. They are not easy to be bribed, and their loyalty is guaranteed. "Mr. Knight, I hope you will not disappoint me." After Knight Alvin got up, Edward glanced at everyone again, and then announced loudly, "The commander of the cavalry company of the guards is." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217 Nameless. The commander of the cavalry company of the guards is Knight Baldwin. After finishing speaking, Edward turned his eyes to Baron, who was at the front of the team. With admiration in his eyes in this regard, Baron felt that it was like a pie in the world. God suddenly fell in love with him, and he couldn't accept it in his mind for a while. As the senior officer of the entire guards, among the 20 or so knights, he was neither the one with the deepest background, the widest network, nor the most meritorious service, which surprised everyone. Regarding this, Edward glanced at the dissatisfied man, and said, "Cavalier Baldwin is not only brave in battle, but he is also indomitable, and his riding skills are also very good. He is qualified for the position of cavalry company commander." Seeing the appearance of His Majesty the King endorsing him, everyone put aside their envy and congratulated him with smiles and kindness, and Baron also responded one by one afterwards. He stepped out and knelt in front of Edward on one knee. His rough face was full of excitement, and tears were about to come out of his eyes. "It is my greatest honor, Baron Baldwin, to serve you." The excitement in the voice was felt by everyone present. For this, some knights silently despise it, but they really know how to flatter. But Edward admired it very much. He felt that this was a feeling, which just proved that he was a person who knew how to be grateful. The fact that Baron Baldwin was selected was only one of the 3 nominated by Knight Alexander, and he was not even valued by Knight Alexander, just as a bonus. But Edward took a fancy to him, especially his civilian background, which was very rare at the time. Those who can become knights are basically from knight families or noble families. There are very few nobles from commoner backgrounds, even fewer than pandas. After all, there are very few civilians who can afford horses and armor. His background allowed him to win this opportunity in the guard army. What is needed is balance, and it is not good for one family to dominate crack. Edward clapped his hands, and immediately, a group of maids filed out, bringing plates of delicious food. Immediately afterwards, a group of soldiers brought barrels of wine, and the aroma was overflowing. "Everyone, today is a happy day, let's have a toast." Edward raised his glass with a smile on his face, and said to the crowd, who couldn't help swallowing, "Bless your Majesty." Everyone held up their wine glasses and saluted Edward. Soon, the atmosphere became lively, and you pushed me around, extremely cheerful. The banquet lasted until the evening, when all the soldiers were carried down one by the soldiers alone and drunk, while Edward only blushed slightly, and so did the Alexander knight beside him. They don't want to drink, no one dares to force them, so only the 2 of them are sober in the arena looking at the people who are being carried down by the soldiers full of nonsense. Edward turned around with a smile, and said to Alexander, "Mr. Knight, today I am just giving an overview. I will send someone to tell you the details tomorrow." Exclamation mark. "Yes, Your Majesty." Alexander nodded slightly. "The rest is up to you, my knight." Edward leaned back on the chair and said lazily. Knight Alexander stayed aside, nodding silently. "Don't worry, Your Majesty the King. Okay. I'll leave it to you. I hope this is a good start." Edward stood up all of a sudden, walked slowly towards the exit, and said to Knight Alexander behind him. Knight Alexander looked at the gradually departing king with melancholy eyes, riding a horse and leading his guards. Edward rushed to Hampton Court Palace. Not far away when he came back, the entire sky had become pitch black, and there were even a few silver lines flashing in the sky, which indicated that it was going to rain. The weather in England is so naughty. Edward couldn't help but shook his head and laughed. After dismounting, Edward hurried to his bedroom, and the maid Lucy had already followed. "Your Majesty, it's time for dinner. Her Majesty the Queen Mother, Her Majesty the Princess, and Her Majesty the Queen are waiting for you." Lucy twisted her waist and followed her steps steadily, keeping her eyes on Edward's face, and said softly, "I know, I'm going to take a shower first. I feel extremely uncomfortable." Edward wrinkled his nose, feeling that his body was full of the unpleasant smell of sweat and alcohol, and said in a disgusted tone, "Yes, Your Majesty." Lucy twitched her nose, wrinkled her pretty face, and nodded in approval. "You go and prepare hot water. You go and prepare His Majesty's clothes. You go and prepare soap." Lucy turned around, with a stern face, and ordered the maids of all colors, who followed her step by step, meticulously regarding Lucy's order. The maids quickly nodded in agreement, and then left to prepare. Edward was no stranger to this. As His Majesty's personal maid, Her status was naturally higher than that of the maid, and the management right was naturally in her hands. Edward stretched out his hand, made Lucy bend down, took off his cumbersome and gorgeous clothes step by step, and changed into comfortable pajamas. After that, the bathroom was ready. The bathtub was steaming hot, and the water was sprinkled with red rose petals. Several young and beautiful maids stood beside them. Some sprinkled flowers, some poured hot water into the bathtub from time to time, and some held soap. Yes, there are about a dozen of them holding towels and changing clothes, obeying orders in the bathroom. Edward took off his pajamas, appeared naked in the eyes of many maids, and then stepped into the bathtub, soaked in hot water, relaxed instantly, and his eyelids almost closed. Lucy picked up the soap, applied it on his body, rubbed it with her jade hands, and the maid behind her massaged his shoulders with her delicate hands, and the comfort almost melted away. Regarding the Middle Ages, people's inherent impression is that Europeans did not take a bath in the Middle Ages. This was only a phenomenon after the Black Death, that is, after the 14th century. On a trip to Italy via Switzerland, the 16th century thinker Michel Montaigne wrote in his diary, Baden, small city, in a nearby town, along a river. There are some baths. There are 2 or 3 open public baths, which are only used by the poor. The level of openness of Europeans has been passed down for a long time, and it is also common for men and women to bathe together in public bathrooms. Of course, bathing is still more popular in German and Nordic regions at present. Only Edward in England dares to take a bath so indifferently. He also led Princess Mary, Princess Elizabeth, and little Lolita so that they no longer fear bathing. After spending half an hour soaking in the bath, Edward walked out of the bathroom with great energy and came to the restaurant. And Elizabeth, little Lolita, and Queen Mary were already sitting there, and the 3 of them watched his arrival eagerly, looking very hungry. Chapter 218 Leisurely Love. Sorry, 2 beautiful ladies, I'm late, Edward said to Princess Elizabeth and Queen Mary with a smile on his lips, bending slightly. And the lovely ladies, said Mary, who was dressed as the 5 ladies. Humph. Elizabeth wrinkled her nose, said a little angrily, but also a little funny, my dear king, why are you so busy today? You are late for dinner. When Princess Elizabeth spoke, she gritted her teeth and said coquettishly, but no matter how Edward looked at it, he felt something was wrong. This is not her style. Sure enough, next, she did not disappoint Edward. Look, how hungry little Mary is. While speaking, little Lolita showed a listless expression very cooperatively, and looked at Edward with tears in her eyes. Then you are looking at me. Do you want to starve my sister to death? Princess Elizabeth said with her eyes wide open, making a vicious look in this regard. Edward smiled helplessly. This trick cannot deceive him, and he is too underestimated. Oh. It's all my fault, Your Majesty. Please forgive me. Edward blinked and said in an innocent tone. Just after Princess Elizabeth and little Lolita showed proud expressions, Edward immediately changed his face and showed proud expressions. My sister, you can't fool me with your tricks, not even adding a Mary, Edward said in a relaxed tone, showing a gentle smile. Tell me, what is your request? After hearing this sentence, little Lolita's pitiful face instantly returned to normal, showing a dejected look. However, Queen Mary looked as usual, sitting there peacefully and quietly, as if she didn't see it, and the other 4 little girls from Scotland watched their performance with curious eyes. It seemed that little Lolita had asked for it beforehand. After seeing them quarreling, all 4 of them pursed their lips, their little faces were tense, and it was written on their faces that we don't know anything. Okay, I knew I couldn't fool you, Elizabeth said casually with a knowing expression. At this time, the servant pulled away the chair covered with white floral striped silk, and Edward took advantage of the opportunity to sit down. At this moment, Luna signaled the servants to serve the dishes with her eyes, and soon the dishes were served one by one. I have nothing to ask for, Elizabeth said indifferently, took a sip of water, stared at him with dark blue eyes, and continued. You can also take it as a little suggestion from a sister to her brother. Elizabeth had a serious face and said in a serious and sincere tone, didn't you notice? You have been busy for the past 6 months, and you haven't stopped to rest, even for Christmas. We're going from Whitehall to Hampton Court. Don't you know your physical condition? You can't just want your England and ignore your own body. Upon hearing this sentence, the Empress Dowager Mary cast a strange look. In the European court, is there such a close brother and sister? Hearing these warm words from Princess Elizabeth, Edward touched his nose unconsciously. To be honest, he really didn't notice that he hadn't rested for more than half a year, and had been devoting himself to the reform, which was busier than the Emperor of China. That wasn't what he wanted. He just wanted to be a happy king. And, by the way, the overlord of Europe and his congenitally weak body can't bear it anymore. No wonder he feels very tired recently, Edward kept thinking in his mind, but his mouth didn't stop. Don't worry about me, Elizabeth, I have my own body, okay? As long as you know. Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Edward, feeling a little angry at his perfunctory attitude. Let's eat. Edward didn't mind, picked up the silver knife and fork and ate. Soon, everyone started to move out to enjoy this tempting food. This is another ordinary and happy day, little Lolita thought happily while eating the sweet cake. Since all the people sitting here are nobles, even if it is a little Lolita, everyone's dining movements are elegant and generous, which is extraordinarily pleasing to the eye. After eating a piece of foie gras in his mouth, Edward looked at the crowd who were eating by themselves, and said, "Let's go for a horse walk tomorrow. A horse farm just happens to be nearby." "Ah. Okay. I haven't ridden a horse for a long time, I can go tomorrow." Princess Elizabeth was eating a glowing red pork chop. When she heard this, she chewed it hard, swallowed it, and said happily, I'm going. Lilith hasn't eaten what I've fed for a long time, she will definitely lose weight." Little Lolita immediately patted the table when she heard this, cheering for joy, and her whole body became energetic. Then, "Your Majesty, how about you?" Edward turned his attention to Queen Mary. "I'd better stay here." "You go, just take care of Mary." The Queen Mother smiled and rejected Edward's proposal. "Okay, I'm full, go ahead." Queen Mary glanced at Elizabeth apologetically, and then left automatically. Regarding this, Edward could only shake his head, sighing in his heart, "This is a stubborn person." "Okay, girls, you can go too," Edward finally said to the 4 Scots Marys who were full of expectations, and immediately won a burst of tender thanks. The next day, as soon as Edward woke up, he found that the sky was drizzling and foggy. After getting dressed under the service of Lucy, I came to the restaurant. I saw 5 valiant little lawless looking out with frowning faces, looking extremely depressed. "My girls, don't worry, it's normal in England, and I think for God's sake there are so many lovely girls, and when we're done eating, there's bound to be a nice day." Edward stepped forward and explained gently, "I just said that the sky will be sunny later. Believe me." They walked to the dining table together, and Princess Elizabeth was eating breakfast. After sitting down, the little Lolita's proud voice came from next to her ear. Edward didn't care about this, and started eating on his own. Sure enough, before they finished eating, the sun appeared in the sky. The mild sunlight slipped in from the windows, and the temperature of the entire restaurant rose a lot. Soon Edward's attention turned to Princess Elizabeth. Today's Elizabeth is wearing a pale gold long dress, with her favorite lace trim as always, and some bright red rose decorations. She wore a white slanted hat with lace trim, a lovely pink bow, and silver earrings with rubies on her ears. The whole person looks youthful, energetic, and extremely pretty. Chapter 219 Leisurely Love. Elizabeth, who was about to get on the horse, seemed to feel the gaze on her body, and immediately turned her head. Her dark blue eyes rolled, and she asked mischievously, "What are you doing?" "Edward, oh. I'm just looking, just looking." Edward was taken aback for a moment, and then quickly waved his hands to explain, "I didn't expect my dear sister to be so beautiful today, like an angel." Edward sighed and said with pretended regret, "It's a pity. So far, no heroic and handsome knight has been able to win her heart." "What a pity." Regarding this, Elizabeth gritted her broken teeth and gave him a vicious look. Without saying anything after that, she ignored Edward's eyes, turned over quickly, and climbed onto a bay red mare. With her legs clamped, the horse ran away like a whirlwind in the blink of an eye. Knowing that he was talking about Elizabeth's sore spot again, Edward shook his head with a smile, and then stepped on his white horse. Arthur and little Laurie and the other 4 Marys were all sitting in the carriage, waiting for the racecars to choose horses. Soon, Edward came to the racecourse with 5 little Lolitas. At this time, Elizabeth was nowhere to be seen, and she knew she was going to ride a horse without looking. "Okay, girls, you can come down." Edward got off his horse and shouted to the carriage behind him. Soon, first the little redhead was exposed, and then Edward came out, and the little lolly came out. In this regard, Edward walked over directly, and hugged the little lolly who was standing on the carriage with a happy smile on his face, winning a burst of laughter like wind chimes. "Okay, Mr. Wendell, take Mary to find the little red horse." Edward turned and said to the stable master who was standing aside with a docile expression, "Yes, Your Majesty." The stable steward bowed and saluted, and then led little Lolita to the row of stables. "Oh, Lilith, little Lolita often came here, walking side by side with Wendell, with a relaxed and happy pace." "Okay, girls, let me carry you down." The 4 little Lolitas on the carriage showed their heads, and looked timidly at the smiling king under the carriage. Seeing that the 4 little girls were a little scared, Edward couldn't help laughing. "Don't be afraid, girls, come, I'll carry you down." As he spoke, Edward showed a handsome smile, clapped his hands, and said encouragingly, but the four of them still hesitated. At this moment, one of the tallest girls seemed to have made up her mind. She supported Edward's right hand and slowly got down. "Your name is Mary Beaton," Edward said kindly, looking at the brown-haired girl who was only a head shorter than him. The girl seemed to know how to be shy, so she nodded affirmatively, then broke free from Edward's hand, and ran to the direction of little Lolly. Afterwards, the other girls got out of the carriage one by one with Edward's support, which also made Edward really know the four little Lollies for the first time. First of all, Mary Beaton, the Beaton family, one of the four major Scottish families, is the daughter of the younger brother of the Bishop of Beaton. She is the tallest, only 9 years old, with brown hair and a little shy. Mary Hamilton, the daughter of the eldest son of the Earl of Allen, the patriarch of the Hamilton family, has light yellow hair and looks gentle and elegant, ladylike and generous. Mary Campbell, 9 years old, is the younger sister of the young Earl of Argyll. Due to being favored by the whole family, she has a somewhat arrogant temper, but she dare not be presumptuous in England. She also knows the situation. The body is relatively plump, the small face is chubby, and it looks very cute. The last one is the shyest. Mary Lennox, 8 years old, the third sister of Earl Lennox. She is timid and shy by nature, but she looks the most beautiful. Has the same red hair as little Lolita, but she is light red, which adds to her unique charm. When Edward was about to say something, Mary Lennox finally came down. "Okay, let's go too. Choose a pony you like," Edward said to the four little Lollies with a friendly smile. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The four Marys saluted Edward unanimously, and their delicate voices rang in Edward's ears. "Let's go. After all, they have been trained in aristocratic etiquette." I heard that the four major families also sent tutors here to cultivate aristocratic etiquette and temperament. Of course, by the way, inquire about England's intelligence, Edward thought silently in his heart. The four little girls walked step by step, following the etiquette teacher's instructions, looking dignified and generous, full of aristocratic air. "Don't be like this here, take it easy. This is not a palace, it's just a place to have fun." Edward turned around, looked at the four little Lollies who moved gracefully, but at a slow speed, and encouraged. Seeing this, the four little Lollies slowly let go of their steps, and their steps gradually became cheerful. Soon, Edward was surpassed by the four of them. Looking at the four with happy smiles on their faces, Edward felt that he had done a good deed and was very proud. They went to choose horses, but Edward led his white horse to a stable. Inside is a brown mare, more than half a year older than the white horse Arthur, and also Arthur's partner. Arthur just came of age this year, and Edward chose a beautiful and good-blooded mare for him as his companion. This made Arthur very happy. He stayed in the stable all day long and didn't go out for a walk. After not seeing him for a month, he lost a lot of weight. When the mare was in estrus, Arthur had no choice but to force herself out and was alone again. As a result, during the 1-month estrus period, the mare was pregnant. This was known 2 months later. Edward took Arthur to the opposite side of the stables, where the environment can be said to be the best, and this is the exclusive place for pregnant mares. During pregnancy, the mare eats well, lives well, and goes out to bask in the sun from time to time. Don't live too comfortably. Here, there is no need for someone to lead the way. Arthur's black nose moved, took a sniff, and walked straight. Edward also followed it leisurely, and soon reached his destination. Arthur was already licking his face and seemed to be standing in front of the fence with a pitiful look on his face, but the mare also ignored it, eating oats with eggs sandwiched in the trough. Looking cold and arrogant, Arthur didn't care about this. He stretched out his big red tongue, licked his lips and nose constantly, and looked at the feeding mare motionlessly. Seeing this, why does Edward feel that this kid is envious of others? With a hungry look on his face. Chapter 220 Leisurely Love. For Arthur's behavior, the mare ate more happily, and Arthur's saliva flowed more and more wantonly. Instead of seeing the scene of deep love between husband and wife, he saw this scene, which made Edward dumbfounded. Of course, it is also possible that it is different from what Edward thought. This is another way to express love. The probability of this is probably a bit low in this regard. Edward chose to leave the place out of sight, leaving the couple to get along on their own. Don't let it in, just keep it like this. Edward looked at Arthur's snow-white and fat butt, wishing he could kick him, and directly ordered the simple and honest groom beside him angrily. By the time Edward came out, there were already 5 little ponies in the stables led by 5 little girls. The little girls kept whispering in the ears of the horses enthusiastically, and there was a burst of laughter from time to time. Seeing this, Edward walked over and said with a smile, Beautiful girls, have you chosen your own horse yet? Of course, yes, your majesty. Two voices came from Edward's ears. Little Lolita showed a puzzled expression, shook her head, looked around him, and asked curiously, where's your Arthur? Edward, oh. Arthur. He's gone to accompany his wife. Edward waved his hand and said casually, that's it. Little Lolita showed sly eyes and said softly, Edward, why don't we compete together and see who gets to Elizabeth first? Little Lolly pointed to a figure in front of her and said crisply, said it was Elizabeth. Edward stood on tiptoe, looked carefully, and saw that it was indeed Elizabeth. Okay, yes. Edward agreed. Little Lolita was overjoyed. Brother Edward would not win against Lilith and me without Arthur and riding an unfamiliar horse. This time I will definitely win. Seemingly thinking of something good, little Lolly had a secretly delighted expression on her face, but Edward dragged his long tail, interrupting little Lolita's fantasy. Let's put some bets on it. Otherwise, we won't be interested in this competition. Edward showed a lack of interest, which confused a group of little lollies. This is exactly what I want to say. Little Lolly seemed to feel a sense of foreboding. Her little nose wrinkled. If I win, you have to study with a ceremonial mother for a month. Edward said in a relaxed tone, as if it was a simple matter. Hateful. I knew that Brother Edward was not that kind, little Lolita thought bitterly in her heart. Okay. Little Lolly resisted the fear and agreed directly, if I win, you will make me a fun toy. Seeing little Lolita's reluctant expression, Edward also agreed, and the four Marys on the side seemed to be watching a drama performance, enjoying it. You guys also want to participate together? Little Lolita said directly, looking at her playmates. But, Your Majesty, I'm a little scared. The other three agreed, and only one timid voice sounded, don't be afraid, we will definitely win. Little Lolita patted the most beautiful Mary comfortingly and said confidently. Seeing this, Mary Lennox could only bite her lip and nodded slightly. Afterwards, Edward casually brought a black adult horse in the stable, ready to start. They are all from Scottish aristocrats, and it can be said that they have been in contact with horses since they were young. For them, riding a horse is already commonplace for them. Unfortunately, their self-confidence seemed a little blind to Edward. The gap between a foal and an adult horse is very large, and this cannot be bridged by riding skills regardless of their speed. And adult horses, their free and easy and playful personalities are enough to make them eat a pot after the game. Little Lolita quickly understood that victory was hopeless. It was almost a mile from here to Elizabeth's at the beginning. Several of them were able to keep pace with each other, but when they reached the middle distance, the ponies lost interest. Some slowed down, some stopped to graze, and some turned around directly, ready to go back to the stables to graze. After leading a certain distance, Edward watched all kinds of dramatic performances behind him and laughed, ignoring little Lolita's annoyed expression and cute white eyes. In this way, he also stopped halfway and watched the performance with great interest. At this time, a horse suddenly accelerated and ran in another direction. There was a scream from the horse, and there was even a hint of crying. Edward looked up, and saw the beautiful red-haired lolly Mary Lennox screaming in panic, holding the rein tightly with her right hand, leaning back. Seeing this, Edward quickly pinched his legs and chased after him, and the little lollies were also frightened. They got off their horses one after another. Their breathing was a little short, their little chests were twitching. It seemed that they were all frightened. The adult horse under Edward's crotch was not a vegetarian. It was much faster than the foal, and quickly caught up. He tried several times to make the foal stop quietly, but to no avail. Now, for him, a horse trader, he could only express his helplessness. But the current condition of the pretty little lolly is not bad. The rein is held firmly, so there should be no danger. Edward followed step by step on horseback, hoping that the pony would stop when it got tired. After galloping like this for 5 or 6 minutes, the little pony came to a herd of horses and slowly slowed down. Seeing this, Edward also slowed down. Soon, the foal stopped near a mare grazing with its head down, and touched the mare's head with its head. Edward seized the opportunity, slowly approached the foal, and held red-haired Mary down, and the red-haired lolly was lying in Edward's arms, buried her head in his chest, sobbing unceasingly. Her face was stained with tears. She seemed quite frightened. Okay, it's all right. Edward coaxed softly. Look, is the little pony suckling? Little Lolly raised her head slowly after hearing the words, and watched the foal huddled beside the mare, sucking it with her mouth, while the mare buried her head in the grass without paying attention. After a while, little Lolita was completely attracted and forgot to cry. Sure enough, children are still children, they come and go quickly. After a while, Edward carried her to the horse, and led the horse to walk ahead, and the little lolly was slowly fascinated by watching his back, and a sweet smile slowly appeared on his face. After walking for a while, I saw the heroic Princess Elizabeth riding a big brown horse to greet her. Edward, are you all right? Hearing this caring greeting, Edward looked at his anxious elder sister and said with a smile, it's all right. Chapter 221 The Secret Behind It. In this way, Edward's few days of Christmas vacation came to an end. The time came to January 1st, 1550, harvest. After getting to know all 5 Marys, I have a good understanding of my personality and temperament. In a word, I can say, I can make some deep changes. A relaxed and happy life always goes by very quickly. No, when Edward arrived at the Whitehall Palace indoors in London, he heard Emma, the butt secretary, say that Adler Todd, the general manager of the Royal Bank, asked to see him. Oh, I think, my dear Mr. Todd will bring me good news. What do you think, Emma? As soon as he heard it was Adler, Edward knew it was the bank's business. He smiled, looked at the big-breasted little secretary standing beside him, and said with a hint of teasing in his eyes, Your Majesty, how do I know? Emma seemed embarrassed by his kind eyes, and replied coquettishly immediately. He turned his head and left the office quickly. Soon, there was a knock on the door. Squeak. A thin figure walked in with about waist, with a Mediterranean hairstyle and golden curly hair on his head, which perfectly fit the standard appearance of a Jew. Your Majesty, your loyal subject Adler Todd is here to report to you. Adler bent down respectfully, took off his hat like an English gentleman, and spoke in English. Regarding this, Edward felt a little satisfied in his heart. If he didn't know his details, he would definitely think he was an authentic Englishman. And Edward heard what he said, and he just nodded his head lightly. Mr. General Manager, Christmas is just after Christmas, and I hope to hear some good news. Seeing His Majesty the King's indifferent expression, Adler knew that he had to give something genuine to satisfy him. I saw Adler with a flattering smile on his face, bowed his waist, slowly approached Edward, and said respectfully, Your Majesty, thanks to your blessing, as of today, we have converted the 39 counties of England to a branch has been established. Really? It's very good, my sir. I'm very satisfied. For being able to complete his task within a few months, Edward praised without hesitation and nodded with satisfaction. Your compliment, this is the best reward for my hard work. Adler quickly became humble after seeing His Majesty's satisfied expression. Well, my sir, you are free, you and your family are free, and you will never be arrested in England again. Looking at the Jew who betrayed his belief and has an English surname, Edward said grandly, directly exempting his family from being criminals. Rewards are rewarded for meritorious service. This is a compulsory course for a monarch. A monarch who can't even reward and punish is unqualified in this regard. Edward has read so many novels in his previous life, so he certainly understands the importance of rewards, which is the prerequisite for unlocking a loyal minister. Hearing that His Majesty the King personally pardoned his family's crimes and returned their free lives, Adler's face flushed a little, his fingers trembled a few times due to excitement, and then returned to normal under his self-control. Fortunately, he knew that this was in the palace, otherwise he would really have to look up to the sky and laugh a few times to soothe the excitement in his heart. Who would have known that, as a high-class person in London, his whole family would be imprisoned overnight, and his life might be at risk at any time. With anger in his heart, Adler converted and became a Protestant Jew, and was given a surname. He has been busy for more than a year, just to get rid of the identity of this criminal. If his wish came true today, how could he not be excited? Edward also looked at his patient expression carefully, which was very interesting. Thank you, Your Majesty. Adler bent even deeper, and his tone became much more sincere. Mr. Todd, this is just your salary for a year. I think the Royal Bank needs you to continue to lead. Edward said in a friendly tone, leaning his body. It's just that your sons and daughters should stop believing in Judaism and follow their father. Edward said softly, not waiting for Adler to smile, but this gave him a head start. The smile on his face slowly froze, and his raised head slowly lowered. Yes, Your Majesty, I will follow your instructions. Adler said in a low voice, the expression on his face gradually softening. And Edward looked back at the chair, and softly uttered a syllable in his throat. You go down first. Now you have to hurry up and make arrangements for each municipality. Edward said lightly, his eyes closed, and he no longer looked at Adler. After lightly answering yes, Adler left the office. Goodbye, Secretary Emma. A smile appeared on Adler's face, and after saying this to Emma, who stood up beside him, he left quickly without waiting for her response. Seeing Mr. Adler gradually disappearing in front of her eyes, Emma felt that he was a little strange, but she didn't know where the strangeness was. It's so nerve-wracking. Emma rubbed her head, thinking silently in her heart. After Adler left, Edward opened his eyes. How could he be completely at ease with Adler, a Jew who has so much money, Bloodblade has always regarded Adler as an important target, and round-the-clock surveillance is inevitable, which made him know Adler's intentions in his heart. Adler is very repulsive to Protestantism, but he can't change it. He can only let his children continue to believe in Judaism. Anyway, the Jews are mainly divided according to the matrilineal line. This just proves that Adler has not completely surrendered to himself, and even tried to resist. He must pull his whole family out of Judaism, so as to avoid future troubles. Edward was pondering slowly in the office, while Adler was sitting in the carriage, galloping fast in the scene where no one looked around. He breathed a sigh of relief, and when the cold wind from the window blew, he shivered from the cold. It turned out that his back was already covered with dense sweat, and when the wind blew, his underwear was immediately soaked, and it was naturally chilly. He quickly closed the window, and the whole person came back to his senses. He let out a heavy breath before he slumped on the cushion, recalling the conversation with His Majesty the King. He is now a little scared and terrified. Could it be that His Majesty the King saw something and beat me up? Blinking his eyes, Adler thought carefully. It seems that I can no longer meet with that group of people. Be careful, and the life of the family is the most important thing. Today I will ask them to convert. Adler patted his beating hard and made a decision. Chapter 222 The Duke Who Painted. The cold winter wind blows against the roadside sycamore trees from time to time, and it seems that they will not give up until they knock off the few remaining leaves from the branches. But the tall and straight sycamore tree is holding on at this time, unwilling to give in half a point, still hanging a few dry autumn leaves to resist, as if to prove its unyielding spirit. On the side of the Duke of Norfolk's mansion, facing the empty appearance in front of the mansion, two young servants could only tilt their necks listlessly and wait at the gate. Tell me, there has been no one in the Duke's mansion for 2 or 3 years. Why do we need the two of us to guard it? One of the thin servants looked around, and asked softly to his fat companion on the other side, how do I know? This is what the housekeeper meant, for the dignity of the Duke's mansion. Fatty's voice was a little thick, and his face was full of doubts. Hey, we are all so unlucky. We used to be on duty here, and there was a lot of oil and water to fish for. Now we can only blow the cold wind and freeze me to death. The thin man's eyes were listless, his neck was tilted, and he sighed helplessly. When the wind blows, the whole person trembles non-stop. Yes. It's winter, no matter how much you wear, it's better inside. Fatty said tremblingly, his teeth chattering in the face of the damp cold window. It would be great if it could be the same as before, and the food at home can be improved from time to time. The thin man looked longingly at the sparsely populated street. Suddenly, a carriage appeared on the street. Although it didn't have many precious decorations, it slowly stopped at the Duke of Norfolk's mansion. I saw 2 rich merchants in silk and satin get out of the car and walk slowly to the front of the mansion. In this regard, the fat man and the thin man immediately beamed with joy. This is the best gift God has brought them. When they looked carefully, one had a fat body and a broad face, and one could tell at a glance that he was a fat and oily rich businessman. The other had a thin figure, covered by a black cloak, making it impossible to see clearly. When the two slowly approached them, the thin man and the fat man raised their chins more and more steeply, looking extremely proud. Excuse me, is there a hospital nearby? My brother is sick. The chubby rich businessman hurried forward and said kindly. Cut. The thin man curled his lips, turned his neck directly, and ignored him. The utterly disappointed thin man had already greeted the maternal relative of the fat rich businessman in front of him several times. In his heart the fat man also felt a little unhappy, but he was straightforward and replied seriously, Sir, this is the Duke of Norfolk's mansion. You can't come if you have anything to do. For the hospital, you go straight ahead and turn around at the intersection. You can see it straight ahead. Thank you, little brother. The rich businessman said with a smile, this is a gift for you, and you deserve it. After saying this, the rich businessman and the sick brother returned to the carriage, leaving the fat man and the thin man with astonished faces. My God, a shilling, what a rich fellow, said the thin man in surprise, looking at a silver coin in the fat man's hand. Yes. Hey. The fat man smiled foolishly. There's half of me in it. The thin man said without hesitation, looking at the silver coin greedily. No. This is mine, it's all mine. The fat man stared at the thin man with his eyes wide open, and said directly. 6 pence, no, it's all mine. 5 pence, no, it's all mine. Looking at the fat man who didn't eat oil and rice, the thin man felt that his mouth was dry and he didn't get any benefit, so he felt unwilling. Looking into the fat man's eyes, he said directly threateningly, then I'll tell my father, you won't get much. How about? Hearing the thin man's threatening words, the fat man said hesitantly, I'll give you a penny. No. 6 pence, 1.5, no, 6 pence, Thus, the two brothers began a new battle. The carriage drove slowly in the direction the fat man pointed, and soon arrived at a small hospital, or a private clinic. However, the carriage did not stop at the entrance of the clinic. Instead, it continued to move forward and stopped at a small door obliquely in front of the clinic. This place is really hard to find. The cloaked man got out of the carriage, looked at the small door in front of the black tool, and said to the fat rich businessman beside him, his voice was low and hoarse, "Yes. It's really hard to find." The fat rich businessman looked up, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and said, "Dong dong dong." The groom stepped forward with a wink, holding the cold copper block on the door, and knocking. "Who is it?" There was an irritable voice from inside the door, and soon the door was opened, and a 7 or 8-year-old child was wearing shabby clothes and yawning. "Children, we are guests invited by the Duke." The fat businessman took a step forward and whispered in his ear, "Come in." The child glanced at the two of them, then at the carriage in front of the door. The carriage comes in slowly. Afterwards, the child directly let the two of them in, and directed the carriage through the narrow doorway. After closing the door, the child breathed a sigh of relief, and said to the two of them, "The carriage goes straight to the rear. There is a stable there, and someone will take care of it. You two follow me. Don't talk too much." The child said directly with a serious face. Seeing the child walking straight ahead to lead the way, the fat rich businessman and the cloaked man exchanged glances and followed directly. Soon, the two felt that they had come to a side hall, which contained all kinds of oil paintings and sculptures. A middle-aged man with black curly hair was concentrating on painting oil paintings there, and a silver-haired butler stood by. Afterwards, the child went up to him and muttered a few words to him, and the housekeeper glanced at the two of them and walked over. "I'm so sorry. Your Excellency is painting. Please wait a moment. You can also sit aside and rest for a while." The housekeeper showed a friendly smile, and said in a gentle tone, without any intention of looking down on the two of them, "It's okay, it's okay. The Duke's business is more important." The flesh on the fat businessman's face was squeezed into a ball, his eyes were narrowed, and he nodded and bowed. "It just so happens that we are all so tired, we can take a rest. Thank you, Mr. Butler. The two of you will rest for a while, and His Excellency the Duke will receive you in a while." When the silver-haired butler heard such good words, his smile became more gentle. He glanced at them, bowed to both of them, and walked towards the Duke. "Sit down. Don't be in a hurry." The fat businessman put away his smile, looked at the cloaked man, and said helplessly, "N." The cloaked man nodded, sat on a chair beside him, took off his black cloak, and took a deep breath. Chapter 223. The Duke of Norfolk. The man who lifted the cloak was as thin as he looked on the surface, like a skinned skeleton, frighteningly thin. He had thick black eye bags, deep sunken eyes, withered yellow skin, and long dark red hair that was messy at this moment, like a serf on a manor. "Darren, thank you very much this time." The man in the cloak showed a forced smile, and said to the fat businessman who was sitting cautiously beside him, "Don't say that. If you hadn't supported me back then, I'm afraid I'd have gone bankrupt long ago. How could I have survived till now?" Fat Darren glanced sideways at the Duke and the butler, who were serious about painting. After getting a little distance away from the man in the cloak, he said softly. His face was full of fat and he looked extremely sincere. "Besides, you are still my relative. If I don't take care of you, who'll I take care of?" Seeing what the fat man said, Russell just smiled. He looked very moved, but his heart was cold as a Scot. When he was discussing with Donald and his party, a group of red capes broke in suddenly and captured them in one fell swoop. Just before his moment of desperation, the relative happened to be transporting goods from England to Edinburgh. When he discovered what had happened on the way, the strange thing is that he was not afraid, nor did he choose to turn a blind eye. Instead, he encouraged the cargo mercenaries around him to act together to rescue him. Even without the cargo next, the relative did not know how to find a way from Edinburgh to London, all the way safe and sound. Afterwards, they were discovered by the group of red cloaks in London, and they happened to be rescued by people from the Duke's mansion of Norfolk at this time. After getting some explanations, the two of them came to the Duke's mansion. "All of this, as long as you are not an idiot, you will understand that this is all arranged. He is just a pawn, and a pawn with great influence. Therefore, even though he knew all this, Russell still pretended not to know and maintained a good relationship with this relative." Russell glanced at His Excellency the Duke, who was still painting. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he quickly calmed down again. The eyes were slightly closed, the face was stiff, and the whole person returned to the original cold appearance, keeping strangers away. Seeing his expression like this, Fat Darren also suppressed his smile, staring intently at the Duke of Norfolk in the painting. "Okay. The Duke of Norfolk painted the last paint in the painting, took a step back, showed a happy smile, and admired it carefully. "My butler, how do you look at this painting?" The Duke of Norfolk asked his butler with a smile on his face. "Wrinkled, Your Excellency, this painting of yours is even more brilliant than before. If you brighten the light of the sun." The silver-haired butler glanced at the hunting picture and said with a complimenting smile, but finally added a sentence of his own opinion, "Ha ha ha." The Duke of Norfolk smiled heartily, not paying attention to his butler's comments at all. "My housekeeper, your eyes are still as sharp as ever." The Duke of Norfolk pointed to the silver-haired butler beside him, and praised him. "I'm very honored by your compliment." The housekeeper didn't show any politeness to him, and directly bowed down to salute, accepting the compliment with an expression of great honor. "Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk. He is the uncle of Anne Boleyn, the second Queen of Henry VIII, and the uncle of Princess Elizabeth, the uncle of Catherine Howard, the fifth Queen of Henry VIII. It can be said that during the period of Henry VIII, his power was second only to Thomas Cromwell, who presided over the Reformation, and he was in power for a while, and most importantly, he has a cheating son as a result, because he believed in Catholicism and opposed the Reformation, and in order to protect Edward from successfully ascending the throne. Under the persuasion of Edward Seymour and the Earl of Warwick, he and his son were charged with rebellion. The conservative duke threw himself into the Tower of London. Fortunately, after Edward came to the throne, in order to establish a good image and persuade many nobles, he was released after 3 years of eating and drinking. The 77-year-old duke is still in good health. "Okay, I won't argue with you today, a guest is coming." The Duke of Norfolk shook his head helplessly, turned and left. When Russell and Fatty Darren saw His Excellency the Duke approaching, they quickly got up and saluted respectfully. "Good day, Your Excellency the Duke." One was indifferent, and the other was uncontrollably happy. The Duke of Norfolk glanced at the two of them, nodded in response, and then turned his attention to the red-haired Russell. "This is Mr. Russell," the Duke of Norfolk said with certainty, looking at the skinny Kate with piercing eyes. "Yes, Your Excellency the Duke." Russell nodded quickly and smiled. "I heard that Your Excellency has always been known as the Fox of Scotland. It is a rare opportunity to meet today. It is really a happy thing." The Duke of Norfolk looked at him a few times, and commented in a hoarse voice, "My lord, this is just a joke among friends, it can't be taken seriously." Russell looked at the wrinkled Duke of Norfolk, shook his head and smiled, and denied softly, "Come on, let's sit down and talk slowly, how tiring it is to stand." The Duke of Norfolk found a seat, sat down slowly, and said to the two who were still standing after the two thanked each other, they sat aside consciously, cautious and cautious, for fear of offending the Duke of England. As if feeling the tension between the two, the Duke of Norfolk chatted with them about the specific situation in Scotland with a smile on his face, like an ordinary old man eager to learn anecdotes, unknowingly relaxing them. "Mr. Russell, I don't know if there is much resistance in Scotland against religious reform?" After a joke and laughter, the Duke of Norfolk asked calmly, as if this was a very common question. "Your Excellency, it's hard to say." Looking at the probing eyes of the Duke of Norfolk, Russell said hesitantly, "How?" The Duke of Norfolk continued to ask. "The group of nobles in Scotland have nothing to gain, and seeing the great interests of the Church, they will definitely do their best to deal with it. For this sake, how can Russell not know that this is the value of him being used?" So, with a straight expression, he said seriously, "Archbishop Eaton in the Diocese of Scotland is an aristocratic man, inclined to Protestantism. However, the local churches and monasteries are against Protestantism. Although they have accumulated strong power for hundreds of years, they do not have a leader with high morals and high prestige. Their power is scattered. Over time, they will definitely be wiped out in batches. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224: The Tragic Farce. After talking in detail for more than an hour, Russell reported to the Duke of Norfolk what he had learned and analyzed in detail. His mouth was dry, and he saw Norfolk's satisfied appearance. "Mr. Russell, you stay here first. After a while, I will naturally find you." The Duke of Norfolk patted him on the shoulder, with a faint smile on his face, and then walked away slowly. The silver-haired butler stayed behind, showing a kind smile at the two of them. "Please, gentlemen." Russell chose to obey the arrangement without hesitation, and walked straight to the guiding place, and the fat Darren followed directly at this time. Our Majesty the King is receiving Fairess Alexander, the Speaker of the Privy Council, who does not have a strong sense of presence. A while ago, with Edward's approval, Seymour resigned as the Speaker of the House of Commons. According to the usual practice, the President of the Privy Council, Fairess Alexander, also served as the Speaker of the House of Commons, becoming a veritable leader of the Privy Council. Of course, there are also some reasons for Seymour's age, and Edward's decision to strengthen his control over the House of Commons. After all, when Seymour existed, he was too tolerant of the House of Commons, conniving at the House of Commons against the royal power. Your Majesty, the merger of the Financial Expenditure Management Office and the Finance Department has been completed, and I think they are capable of completing the tax collection task. Fairess lowered his head slightly, and reported to His Majesty the King meticulously. And His Majesty the King listened seriously. Speaking of the Finance Department, this was the most important financial institution in the hands of the royal family in the past, including the Revenue Increase Court, the Chief Inspector of the Royal Territory, as well as tithes. First-year salary and other royal income institutions were under its jurisdiction before the merger. Edward asked Fairess Alexander, who was the Minister of Finance, to separate all of these and merge them into the Chief Financial Officer led by Luna, leaving an empty shell to merge with the Financial Expenditure Management Office. Your Excellency, Speaker, don't worry about collecting the subsidy. We'll talk about it after a while. Besides, the taxes paid by London to the central government every month are already enough for the central government's expenditure. Edward looked at the chairman of the Privy Council in front of him, and said lightly, "Yes, Your Majesty." Fairess wanted to continue, but seeing His Majesty's expression, he could only swallow. By the way, I think the Northern Affairs Committee should be rearranged. Hearing His Majesty's words, the doubts in Fairess's mind increased even more. Your Majesty, the French have been risking poisonous water. Although the aristocratic forces in the north have been wiped out, for the sake of stability, the existence of the Northern Affairs Committee is still necessary. Regarding this matter, Fairess felt that he still needed to make an opinion. This was related to the stability of England, and he could not be careless. He couldn't help saying with a solemn expression on his face, the Northern Affairs Committee was not set up to guard against the Scots, and the English were never afraid of the Scots. The committee was set up solely to suppress rebellious aristocratic forces in the northern counties bordering on Scotland. At that time, in 1536, the so-called Grace Pilgrimage religious riots broke out in the north. In fact, Henry VIII used the religious reform to wipe out the local separatist aristocracy, and the aristocrats were unwilling to lose their rights. Rebellion Henry VIII did not hesitate to suppress, and also used the religious reform to sweep away the local separatist forces. From then on, the local nobles completely lost their judicial power and military power, and completely lost the power to compete with the king. From then on, the Tudor monarchs had no power to hinder their rule over England and Wales. Listening to the words of the Speaker of the Privy Council, Edward had to think about it. It is indeed not a good way to treat the north as an experimental area. Besides, Scotland has not been stable in recent years, so it is still not suitable to move lightly. Since Your Excellency is so opposed, forget it. Edward said casually. Hearing what His Majesty the King said, Fairess felt like he was about to spit out a mouthful of old blood. This is too casual, Fairess muttered slowly in his heart, but his face still had a serious look. Your Excellency, please prepare. On April 1st, the Privy Council will hold a civil servant's public admission examination in the name of the Central Committee and me. Just as Fairess was thinking about whether he should leave, the young king's loud voice came from his ear. What? Fairess cried out for a moment, then he came back to his senses and apologized to Edward for his mistake. Please forgive my rudeness, Your Majesty the King. Fairess said quickly, but this is really a surprising thing. With all due respect, Your Majesty, at present, there are more than 200 people in the entire central government, which is completely enough to handle England's affairs, and there is no need to recruit any more. If there is another recruitment, I don't think it will be of more use except to increase the waste of extra money. Fairess straightened up and looked directly at the young king. He felt great at this moment, as if he was saving a young and ignorant king, and his glorious deeds would definitely spread in England, Europe, and all over the world. Wandering poets continued to promote this loyal minister to people everywhere, and even hundreds of years later, books about him were recorded in their deeds, and they were looked up to by later generations. Okay, Your Excellency the Minister. Edward looked at Fairess' expression as if he had saved the world in front of him, a little bit dumbfounded, and immediately interrupted him. Your Majesty, we really shouldn't need to recruit. Fairess looked into Edward's eyes sincerely, as if seeing a child who had lost his footing, which made Edward feel extremely uncomfortable. Speaker Alexander, I don't think the Privy Council has reached the point where it can make a decision for the king. Edward stared at Ferrus and said in a serious tone, my order, you will understand after a while, and now, you just have to follow my orders. Seeing His Majesty speak in such a stern tone, Ferrus remembered his identity, quickly shrank his neck, and said timidly, follow your instructions, Your Majesty the King. Okay, you can go out now. Edward said angrily when he saw that he had immediately returned to his original form. Just when Ferrus turned and left, thinking that the matter had passed, a voice suddenly came from behind. You are responsible for this matter. Don't let others handle it. If you don't understand, ask Mayor William. I think he will help you. Remember, if I'm not satisfied in the end, I'll have your fruit. Hearing the last sentence, Ferrus felt that he wanted to die. How could such a subjective condition be satisfied? Chapter 225 Local Governance in England. As we all know, the era of the Tudor dynasty was the most powerful era of the British autocratic monarchy, and the aristocratic and religious forces shrank in an all-round way, resulting in a situation where the monarchy was dominant. There are three pillars that support the absolute monarchy: the finance department, the Privy Council, and the local government. These three are the biggest pillars of the royal power. The predecessor of the Privy Council was the Advisory Council, an institution that consulted the previous kings. Its members were all local nobles and senior priests, and they regarded the Advisory Council as an institution that influenced and restricted the royal power in the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII changed it to the Privy Council, an administrative agency completely controlled by the king, and with the Privy Council as the core, the central institution of England was established, and its administrative center position was established. The rights of the Privy Council are combined with the Great Seal of the Justice, the Great Seal representing the rights of the king, and the Jade Seal representing the king himself. That is to say, it possesses judicial and administrative powers and has become a national institution. Institutionalized. The Finance Office is also an institution used by nobles to restrict the royal power. Although the Minister of Finance is appointed by the king, it is supervised and restricted by the four nobles. For all kings, this is intolerable. In order to strengthen the royal family's management of finances, Edward I set up a brocade library to overhang the Treasury Department. Edward II and Edward III used the inner court to manage finances, and Edward IV set up inspectors to handle and inspect the royal family's financial management. By the time of Henry VIII, the royal family fully controlled the benefits of the royal estate and territory, and strengthened guardianship, inheritance, and judicial rights. That is to say, the former English royal family could not fully decide the income of their royal territory, and was restricted and monitored by the nobles until the period of the Tudor royal family. The income from the royal family's territory really belonged to the royal family, and no one monitored it at present. The Finance Department and the Privy Council's Financial Revenue and Expenditure Management Office have merged to form the Ministry of Finance. The taxes they can currently collect include the first year's salary and the knight's donation. This is not only less money, but also offending people. Edward generously gave it to the Ministry of Finance, in order to allow it to have executive power. Edward merged the income-increasing court that handles church property into the Ministry of Finance. A large number of experienced tax collectors, as well as branches of income-increasing courts all over England, have strengthened the execution capabilities of the Ministry of Finance. It can be said that if you collect subsidies, then it is completely feasible. Having said so much, the most important focus today is local government. Edward had his mind on local government reform. Some people say that the centralization of power will definitely make the English stick to themselves, lose their desire to conquer the sea, and become like China, but they did not see that. Except for England, the whole of Europe began to centralize power vigorously, but the desire for colonies has never stopped. Interests are an important factor for Europeans to conquer the earth. Only when power is centralized can better colonial expansion. As I said before, England is completely controlled by a group of gentlemen, that is, a group composed of squires, knights, quasi-knights, and germanin. The king's control of the place depends on the strong position of the king. Local governance consists of a court model and a committee model. The Tudor government retained the parish system and transformed it into a local basic administrative unit, and Henry VIII subdivided it further, adding 100 households. Therefore, the three-level division of the manor, the 100-household district, the parish county, constitutes the administrative mechanism of England, and of course there are exceptions to the autonomous cities. Judicially, England consists of manor courts, hundreds of district courts, county courts, and city courts. Although the various personnel of the court are composed of local people, They are all appointed by the king and obey the leadership of the king. The committee system was originally a temporary agency set up by the central government to deal with various affairs, for example, the Subsidy Committee, the Nonconformist Committee, the Enclosure Investigation Committee, the Conscription Committee, etc. All kinds of committees with administrative and judicial powers among them. The Public Security Committee, which holds judicial power and some administrative power, is the most important local institution. By appointing unpaid squires and using various committees flexibly, it became the magic weapon for Tudor kings to control the place. In order to adjust the relationship between the court and various committees, the king generally appoints and removes the sheriff to perform this duty. In order to prevent the power of the sheriff from being uncontrollable, the Tudor kings handed over the general power and the right to command the local militia to the sheriff, and adjusted their term of office to 1 year. In this way, the county sheriff completely lost his rights and became an empty shell. I suspect that symbols such as the Governor of Canada come from this. They have legal rights, but they cannot exercise their rights, forming a situation of rule but not rule. Therefore, at present, in the local area, the two people with the greatest power are the magistrate and the county lieutenant. Magistrates run the county courts, administer the poor and manage commerce, and administer social order. People jokingly call them the king's maids, but they are actually carrying out most of the central government's decrees. Although they have judicial power and some administrative power, but the power is dispersed in the hands of the Security Committee, and it is impossible for one family to dominate. Although the county lieutenant has military power, they do not have the king's order and cannot summon the local militia to perform their obligations. They can only lead the usual hundreds of standing militia to suppress the local area. As a result, the Tudor monarchs were not at ease. In order to maintain their rule, they also set up circuit courts. The assizes, as it's called, go round and round the local counties all day long, monitor local officials for corruption and treason, as well as misjudgment of unjust cases. Therefore, although England did not implement centralization at this time, local governance was completely autonomous by the local gentry. However, the royal power's control over the local area has been greatly enhanced. Although it cannot be compared with China, it is much stronger than the European countries. At that time, the king appointed and removed county lieutenants and magistrates for local control and governance, and let the circuit court supervise, which made the turbulent England calm a lot. A peaceful society is conducive to businessmen, and capitalism can sprout, take root, and grow. This is why it is often said in textbooks that capitalists support autocracy and centralization. As the first country to achieve peace, England was able to breed capitalism and was the first to carry out the capitalist revolution. They understand that without a peaceful society, not only will business fail, but even life safety will become a problem. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.